What's up, guys? Welcome to Arcane Paradox. We've got something special today. What if Pomfrey examined Harry at age 5 and found 67 compulsion charms placed by Dumbledore? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Healer Comes. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not an owl. Owls were for wizards who expected correspondence. This was a ministry memo, the enchanted paper kind that folded itself into the shape of an arrow and flew through official channels until it found its target. It found Poppy Pomfrey at 7:30 in the morning, while she was eating toast over the Hogwarts infirmary sink and listening to the castle settle around her with its familiar creaks and groans. The memo unfolded itself in her hand, and she read it twice, and then she set down her toast. She read it a third time. Mandatory Welfare Protocol 7B, Subsection 4, Magical Child of Deceased War Hero. Automated Biannual Review Triggered. Subject, Harry James Potter, age 5. Current Residence, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Anomalous Magical Suppression Readings flagged by Core Monitoring Charm. Examination required within 48 hours. Assigned Examiner, Pomfrey, P. Anomalous Magical Suppression. Poppy had been a healer for 31 years. She had treated Quidditch injuries and dragon pox and, once, a 7th year who had accidentally transfigured his own skeleton into rubber during OWL preparation. She had a clinical relationship with the word anomalous. It meant something was wrong, and the shape of the wrongness needed to be identified. She was at the flu in 4 minutes. She was stepping out into the cold morning air of Little Whinging in 6. Privet Drive was exactly the kind of street that tried very hard to look like nothing interesting had ever happened on it. The houses were identical in the way that suggested someone had thought sameness was the same thing as safety. The lawns were trimmed. The cars were clean. There was a woman 3 doors down already washing her windows at 7:45 in the morning, and she watched Poppy walk down the pavement with the narrow-eyed attention of someone who had appointed herself the street's unofficial customs officer. Number 4 had a garden that was slightly better kept than its neighbors, which told Poppy something before she even knocked. She knocked. The woman who answered the door was large-boned and horse-faced, with a neck that seemed architecturally designed for peering over fences. She looked at Poppy's lime-green healer's robes with the specific expression of someone who has found something unpleasant on the bottom of a good shoe. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not selling anything." Poppy kept her voice pleasant. She was very good at pleasant. "I'm a healer with the Ministry of Magic. I'm here to conduct a mandatory welfare examination of Harry Potter. I have the authorization paperwork here." She produced it from her bag without being asked, and held it up with the brisk efficiency of someone who intended to come inside regardless of the answer. Petunia Dursley's face did something complicated. Several emotions competed for dominance: irritation, alarm, and something that might have been guilt if it hadn't been buried under several thick layers of deliberate not looking. She settled on a thin smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "Well, I suppose you'd better come in then." The house smelled like plug-in air freshener and this morning's bacon, a combination that managed to be both aggressive and hollow at the same time. Everything was aggressively normal: the framed family photos, the good carpet, the china cabinet with its undisturbed display. Poppy noticed all of it and filed it away, but what she was really paying attention to was the silence. The particular quality of silence in a house where a 5-year-old lived. Where was the noise? Where were the small crashes and sudden laughs and inexplicable thumps that children generated as automatically as breathing? "Where is Harry?" she asked. "Sleeping." Petunia's arms were crossed. "He sleeps late." "Lazy, really, for his age." At 7:45 in the morning, children Harry's age typically sleep late, yes. Poppy smiled. "I'll need to examine him now, if you don't mind. The authorization doesn't require your consent, but I prefer to be courteous." Petunia minded. Every line of her body said she minded enormously. But she turned and led Poppy down the hallway, past the kitchen where a very large boy of about 5 was eating an enormous plate of eggs while a man the size of a small shed read the newspaper and pointedly did not look up. Past the stairs. Past a door that Poppy initially took for a broom cupboard. Petunia stopped at that door. Something cold moved through Poppy's chest. "He's in here," Petunia said, and her voice had developed the careful flatness of someone reciting a script they'd practiced. Poppy looked at the door. It had a latch on the outside. A small padlock, currently open, hanging from the hasp. She looked at this for a moment that stretched. Then she reached out, turned the handle, and pushed the door open. It was a cupboard. It was, in terms of floor space, approximately the size of a large wardrobe laid on its side. There was a cot that was too small even for the small child lying in it, a thin blanket that had once been someone else's and hadn't been washed recently enough, and a shelf above with a broken toy car and a crayon stub. A single bare bulb hung from a cord. The cord had a pull string that had been tied up high, out of reach of small hands. Harry Potter was curled on the cot with his knees drawn up and his face turned toward the wall. He was tiny. Poppy registered this with a clinical part of her brain even as the rest of it was doing something else entirely, smaller than a healthy 5-year-old should be by a margin that was not trivial. His hair was a dark mess. He was wearing what had clearly been a much larger child's cast-off shirt, and it hung off his thin shoulder like a flag on a windless day. He didn't move when she opened the door. "Harry," she said, and her voice came out softer than she'd intended. "My name is Poppy. I'm a healer. Can you turn around for me?" A pause. Then the small figure shifted, and Harry Potter turned over and looked at her. He had his mother's eyes. Poppy had known Lily Evans, Lily Potter, and the shock of it hit her square in the sternum. Brilliant, vivid green, watching her with a wariness that was far too old for a 5-year-old face and far too practiced to be recent. There was a scar on his forehead, the lightning bolt shape she'd heard described, faded now to a thin pink line. He didn't say anything. He watched her with those ancient eyes and waited to see what she was going to do. "I'm going to do a health check," she said, keeping her voice gentle and even and her movements slow and deliberate, the way she moved around patients who had learned to flinch. "Is that all right?" Another pause. Then a small nod. "Good." She crouched down to bring herself to his level and drew her wand. "This won't hurt at all. You'll just see some lights." She began with a standard diagnostic, the basic sweep that any healer learned in their first year of training. It was designed to give a quick overview: nutrition, hydration, skeletal integrity, organ function, core magical readings. The spell produced a soft golden shimmer around the patient that translated, if you knew how to read it, into a kind of glowing report. The shimmer appeared around Harry, and Poppy began to read it, and the room got very quiet inside her head. Malnutrition, chronic, not acute, the kind that came from months and years of insufficient feeding rather than a recent bad week. His bone density was below normal. There were healed fractures. She counted 3 in his ribs, 2 in his left hand, 1 in his right forearm, that had been left to set without magical intervention. She kept her face still with 31 years of professional practice and moved on to the next reading. His magical core. A magical core scan looked, to trained eyes, like a topographical map. The core itself showed as a warm light at the center, and a healthy child's core had a quality of expanding brightness, pushing outward naturally as it developed, the way a healthy plant grew toward light. Harry's core was there, it was absolutely, definitively there, and even through the scan she could see that it was extraordinary, the kind of potential that appeared maybe once in a generation, a depth and breadth that made her breath catch, but it was constrained. Bound. Not by anything natural or developmental. By charms. Her first thought was that she was reading the scan wrong. So she cast it again. Slowly. With the exhaustive version of the diagnostic, the one that took 4 minutes and was usually reserved for curse victims and complex magical injuries. The charms resolved into clarity, one by one, like stars appearing as your eyes adjusted to the dark. She counted them. She lost count at 30 and started again. At 50 she stopped and just looked. There were 67 of them. Layered over each other like a palimpsest, each one woven into the edges of the previous one with a craft and precision that spoke of considerable skill and enormous patience. Some were simple, basic suppression charms, the kind used legitimately to protect unstable magical cores in early childhood and removed around age 3. Those would have been the first placed. The older ones, the bottom layer. Placed when Harry was, she calculated, approximately 14 months old. Some of the more recent ones were not simple at all. She identified a loyalty compulsion, not a vague nudge but a specific, targeted charm designed to engender deep, instinctive trust and deference toward a specific magical signature. She identified a self-worth suppressor that was elegant in the way a knife was elegant, precisely shaped to do maximum damage with minimum visibility. It wasn't designed to make Harry sad. It was designed to make him feel, at the core of his identity, that he did not matter quite as much as others, that his needs were secondary, that sacrifice was natural and expected and even desirable. There were courage suppressors. There was something she'd only read about in restricted healer texts, a dependency charm, subtle and deep, that would make the presence of a specific magical signature feel like safety and its absence feel like anxiety. And on every single one of them, woven into the spell work itself the way a painter signed a canvas, was a magical signature. She knew that signature. Everyone in the British magical world knew that signature. Poppy Pomfrey sat back on her heels in a broom cupboard in Little Whinging, Surrey, and for a moment the world was very still and very clear and very terrible. Harry was watching her. He'd been watching her the whole time, those old young eyes moving between her wand and her face with quiet attention, waiting to see what came next. He hadn't asked any questions. He hadn't made a sound. He had the profound stillness of a child who had learned that being still was safer than drawing attention. "Harry," she said. Her voice was steady. She was very proud of how steady it was. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. I'm not going to be upset with you, no matter what you say. Do you understand?" He nodded. "How long have you lived in this cupboard?" He thought about it with the seriousness of someone doing arithmetic. "Always," he said. His voice was small and a little rough, like he didn't use it much. "I think. I don't remember not. And do your aunt and uncle, do they hurt you?" The stillness again. "Longer this time." "Then, Dudley does sometimes. He's bigger than me." "And your aunt and uncle?" A pause that was its own answer. "Then, Aunt Petunia pulls my hair sometimes. When I do accidental magic." He said the words, accidental magic, carefully, like they were vocabulary from a language he'd heard but wasn't sure he was allowed to speak. "Uncle Vernon," he stopped. "It's all right," she said. "He doesn't like me very much," Harry said, which was clearly the gentle-down version of something worse. Then, with a precision that surprised her, "But mostly they just don't feed me much and they lock the door. They don't want me around. I think they were told to keep me here." "Who told them?" Harry looked at her steadily. "The old man," he said. "With the long beard. I remember him from when I was very small. He smelled like lemon drops. He talked to Aunt Petunia for a long time in the kitchen and she cried after. But I think he talked to me too, a little, when she wasn't there. I don't really remember but," he frowned, pressing 2 fingers to the side of his head. "I remember feeling different after. Quieter. Like something got turned down." Poppy stared at him. A 5-year-old. A 5-year-old who had been malnourished and isolated and physically abused and magically suppressed for nearly his entire life, and he had noticed. He had felt the shape of what was done to him even if he couldn't name it. "Harry," she said. "I need you to come with me. I need to take you somewhere safe, and I need to help you. Is that all right?" For the first time, something shifted in his face. Not excitement, it was too careful for excitement. But it was something. A careful, measured thing, like a door opening just a crack to check the weather before you stepped outside. "Are you going to make them stop locking the door?" he asked. "You are never coming back to this house," Poppy said, and the firmness in her own voice surprised her. "I promise you that." The careful thing in his face opened a little wider. She helped him out of the cot and held his hand, his small, thin hand with its bony knuckles, and she walked him out of the cupboard and down the hallway, and when Petunia Desley materialized in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and her chin up and her prepared expression firmly in place, Poppy stopped walking. "I am removing Harry from this property," she said. She had reached for her professional voice and found something harder underneath it. "I am doing so under Ministry Welfare Protocol 7B, which grants a certified healer immediate removal authority in cases of child endangerment. I am also, as of this moment, filing a mandatory report with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the Department of Child Welfare, and the Wisingamots Child Protection Committee." She paused. "I would strongly advise you not to leave Surrey in the next 48 hours. Petunia had gone the color of old milk. "Now see here, I see quite clearly," Poppy said. "I have been seeing for the last 10 minutes. She looked at the woman, and for just a moment let the professional mask slip enough to let what was underneath show. "That child has healed rib fractures. 3 of them. He was 5 years old when the last one occurred, based on my scan. I don't know which one of you is responsible for those, but I intend to find out." The silence in the hallway was its own kind of verdict. She walked Harry out the front door and down the garden path and into the morning, and he went with her without looking back. Not once. She glanced down at him as they reached the pavement and found him looking forward with his jaw set in the way that children set their jaws when they were trying to be brave about something, and she tightened her grip on his hand. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Hogwarts first. It's a castle. I'll explain more when we get there." She reached into her bag with her free hand and produced the emergency port key she kept for field extractions, a bronze disc the size of a large coin, authorized for healer use. "Have you ever traveled by portkey?" He shook his head. "It feels a bit like being pulled by your belly button," she said. "It's over very quickly and it isn't dangerous. Ready?" He looked at the disc with those thoughtful eyes. "Does it hurt?" "No." He nodded, reached out, and put one finger on the disc. "Ready?" he said, with the deliberate steadiness of someone who had decided not to be afraid of this particular thing. She activated the port key. The world yanked sideways, and little whinging disappeared. They arrived on the front steps of Hogwarts with the characteristic lurch, and Harry stumbled and she caught him, and for a moment he pressed against her side with the automatic reaching of a child who rarely got to be held, and then he pulled back and straightened himself and looked up at the castle. His mouth fell open. And for the first time since she'd found him, the wariness in his face was completely gone, replaced by something so unguarded and purely delighted that it was almost painful to look at. He stared at the towers and the great oak doors and the way the early morning light caught the hundreds of windows, and his hand tightened in hers, and he said, very quietly, "This is real." "Very real," she said. "Is this where magic people live?" "Some of them. Children come here to learn magic when they're 11. He looked up at her with those green eyes. "Can I come back when I'm 11? "I think," she said carefully, "that you can come back much sooner than that." She got him inside and settled in the infirmary with warm food. She vanished the protein shake she'd initially prepared and replaced it with actual food because he needed to eat normally, slowly, not be flooded with nutrition potions before his digestive system had adjusted, and while he ate, very carefully and with the focused attention of someone who took nothing for granted, she sat at her desk and wrote 3 letters simultaneously. One to the Ministry. One to Amelia Bones personally, not through official channels, directly, wizard to wizard, because she didn't trust official channels with this, not yet. And one to Minerva McGonagall, who was visiting family in Edinburgh and didn't yet know that the world was in the process of quietly detonating. She sealed all 3 letters and sent them with the 3 fastest owls in the Ollery. Then she went back to the infirmary and sat in the chair beside Harry's bed, because he had finished eating and was sitting with his knees drawn up and his eyes going around the room with the systematic thoroughness of someone cataloging an unfamiliar environment, and she thought she should be present for whatever came next. "Poppy," he said. "Yes." "When you were looking at me. With the lights." He kept his eyes on the room, still cataloging. "You found something bad, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. She looked at him for a moment. He was 5 years old. He had spent 5 years learning to read situations and faces and the quality of silences, because his survival had depended on it, and the result was this, a child who saw clearly through whatever face you tried to show him. She decided to respect that. "Yes," she said. "I found something. In my magic." "Yes." He thought about this. "Can you fix it?" "I'm going to do everything I can," she said. "Some of the removing will need to be done by a specialist, a curse breaker or a very skilled healer who focuses on magical core work. It might take time. But yes. I believe it can be fixed." "And then what?" He had turned to look at her now. "What happens to my magic when it's fixed?" "It becomes yours," she said simply. "What it was always supposed to be." Something moved in his face. The careful door again, opening wider. He looked at her for a long moment with those green eyes, and whatever calculation was happening behind them reached some kind of quiet conclusion. "Okay," he said. "Then, thank you for coming." Poppy Pomfrey had 31 years of not crying in front of patients. The streak remained technically intact, but it took some work. She got him into a proper bed, a real one, with a mattress that was the right size for him and blankets that were clean and warm and thick, and by the time she had settled him in he was fighting sleep with the single-minded stubbornness of someone who didn't entirely trust that good things would still be there when he woke up. His eyes kept closing and jerking open. She dimmed the lights. "I'll be right here," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her for 3 more seconds, and then his eyes closed and stayed closed, and within a minute his breathing was the deep steady rhythm of a child utterly exhausted, and Poppy sat in the chair and watched him sleep and let herself be furious. Not the hot, chaotic kind of fury. The cold, thorough kind, the kind that settled into the bones and stayed there. The kind that organized itself into purpose. 67 charms. On a child who was 14 months old when the first ones were placed. Placed by the most powerful, most respected, most trusted wizard in Britain, the man who had defeated Grindelwald, the headmaster of Hogwarts, the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, the supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. The man whose word was law in the British magical community in every way that mattered. She thought about the loyalty compulsion. She thought about the self-worth suppressor. She thought about the dependency charm. She thought about what Harry had said, the old man with the long beard. "I felt different after. Like something got turned down." She thought about the life Dumbledore had chosen for this child, the cupboard, the locked door, the hunger, the Dursleys, and she thought about the charms designed to make him compliant and self-sacrificing and grateful and loyal, and she thought about prophecies, which she didn't know the specifics of but everyone in the magical world knew existed, and she thought about wars, and weapons, and the difference between a soldier and a chess piece. By the time Amelia Bones' reply arrived at 11 o'clock in the morning, short, crisp, handwritten, saying only "I'm coming. Don't remove anything yet. Lock the diagnostic data." A.B. Poppy had had 4 hours to get her fury organized into something that felt very much like a plan. She locked the infirmary door and began removing the simplest of the 67 charms herself. The old suppression ones, the bottom layer, the ones that had been there since Harry was little more than a baby. She worked with the focused precision of a woman who intended to give Harry Potter back every piece of himself she could reach, and she was still working, slowly and carefully, when the castle's afternoon light was slanting through the high infirmary windows and Harry woke up. He woke up differently than he'd gone to sleep. There was a moment where he didn't know where he was and his body pulled tight with reflexive alarm, and she said his name quietly and he found her with his eyes and the alarm settled. Then something else happened. She watched it happen, this slow spreading thing, as the 2 suppression charms she'd removed began to let slightly more of his core breathe, and Harry's eyes, already remarkable, seemed to sharpen and brighten the way a lamp brightens when you turn up the wick. He looked at his hands. Something's different, he said, with the certainty of someone who had been paying very close attention to themselves for their entire short life. A little, she said. I removed 2. 2 out of 67. He processed this. How long to do all of them? I don't know yet. It depends on how the removal goes. Some of them are quite complex. He nodded. Then he looked up and his gaze went to the window, and the afternoon light caught his face, and he said, "Tell me about the charms. Tell me what they were for." All of them. Poppy looked at him, this 5-year-old in a too-big hospital bed, with his steady, ancient eyes and his thin hands and his uncompromising directness, and she made a decision. She told him. Not everything, she wasn't going to explain magical theory to a 5-year-old, but the shape of it. Some of the charms were meant to make his magic quieter. Some were meant to make him feel a certain way about himself. Some were meant to make him feel safe only around certain people. She watched him take it in. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. They weren't for protecting me, he said at last. It wasn't a question either. No, she said. I don't believe they were. The old man with the beard, he said. He put them there. She didn't answer immediately, and he looked at her with an expression that said he understood her silence perfectly. He's very important, isn't he? Harry said. That's why you're not saying yes. He's very important, she agreed carefully. But you're still going to fix it. Yes. He nodded again, that small serious nod. Then, what's his name? She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Albus Dumbledore. Harry said the name quietly to himself, the way you said something you intended to remember. Then he lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling. When I grow up, he said, I want to learn everything. It sounded like a statement of intent rather than a wish, and the matter-of-fact certainty of it made Poppy's chest do something complicated. I think, she said, and meant every word, that you probably will. The owls arrived at dusk. 3 at once, Amelia Bones confirming her arrival for early the next morning, a reply from Minerva that was 5 sentences long and read like controlled devastation, and a third that Poppy didn't recognize, on parchment that was very good quality and sealed with silver wax. She opened the 3rd letter and read it and then read it again. It was from Dumbledore. My dear Poppy, it began, in that familiar looping hand, warm and unhurried and utterly without alarm. I understand you've had rather an eventful morning. I'd very much like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. I suspect some of what you found today may be rather difficult to interpret without full context. Please do not make any irreversible decisions before we've had a chance to talk. I'll come to you, if that's easier. With great affection and respect, Albus. She read it a 3rd time. Rather difficult to interpret without full context. She set the letter down on her desk. She picked up her wand. She cast the strongest locking and privacy charms she knew on the infirmary door, and then she added 2 that she'd learned from a particularly paranoid aura she treated in 1978 and had never had occasion to use until now. Then she went and sat beside Harry's bed again, because it was getting dark and he was awake and looking at the window with those thinking eyes. Someone's coming tomorrow, she said. A woman named Amelia Bones. She's very good at her job, and she's honest, which matters. She's going to ask you some questions. You don't have to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable, and I'll be there the whole time. Harry considered this. Is she going to help fix the charms? She's going to make sure the right people are held responsible for placing them. He thought about that distinction. Okay, he said. Then, Poppy. Did my mum and dad know about the charms? The question landed like a stone in still water. She'd been expecting many questions but not that one, not yet, and the precision of it, the reaching towards something he couldn't fully see yet but could sense the shape of, was almost breathtaking. No, she said. I don't believe they did. He turned back to the window. Outside, the first stars were coming out over the grounds, very bright and very clear against the darkening blue. Good, he said quietly. I didn't want them to have known. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, one by one, and Harry Potter breathed in the clean air of a room without a locked door for the first time in his memory, and Poppy Pomfrey kept watch, and somewhere across Britain in a very comfortable office behind a griffin-shaped knocker, a very old man wrote careful letters and prepared careful arguments and told himself, as he had always told himself, that he was doing what was necessary. He had no way of knowing, yet, that the 5-year-old currently watching stars through an infirmary window was already 3 steps ahead of him. He would find out. Chapter 2, 67 Signatures. Amelia Bones arrived at 6 in the morning. Not 7, not 6:30. 6 o'clock exactly, while the grounds were still wrapped in that particular grey-blue pre-dawn that made Hogwarts look like something out of a painting, and Poppy had been awake for an hour already, sitting at her desk with Dumbledore's letter in front of her and a cup of tea she kept forgetting to drink. She heard the flow activate in her office anteroom and was at the door before the sound faded. Amelia Bones was a broad-shouldered woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped grey-streaked hair and a monocle that she wore not because she needed it for vision but because it had belonged to her mother, and she'd decided years ago that sentimentality and practicality were not mutually exclusive. She was wearing full DMLE robes despite the hour, which told Poppy that she hadn't slept either. She had a leather satchel over one shoulder and a junior Auror trailing behind her, young woman, dark-skinned, sharp-eyed, who was introduced as Auror Shacklebolt's trainee, a name Poppy immediately forgot because Amelia was already talking. Show me the diagnostic data first, Amelia said, by way of greeting. All of it. Raw scan, not your summary. Good morning to you too, Amelia. It's not a good morning. Show me the data. Poppy showed her the data. She'd transferred the full diagnostic scan to a healer's record crystal the previous night, standard practice for ministry-level cases, the kind where you anticipated that everything you'd found would eventually be examined by people who didn't trust summaries. The crystal projected the scan in the air between them, a slowly rotating schematic of Harry's magical core with the 67 charms rendered in distinct colors according to type and age, oldest at the bottom in deep amber, newest at the top in a cold blue-white. Amelia looked at it in silence for a full 2 minutes. The junior Auror looked at it and then looked at Amelia and then looked at it again with the expression of someone recalculating several things at once. 67, Amelia said. 67 confirmed. I may have missed some in the deeper layers. The older charms have had 4 years to integrate with his natural core development, and some of the boundaries are blurry. The number could be higher. Could it be lower? Could some of these be misidentified? It was a fair question and Poppy had asked it herself, at length, the night before. No, she said. I ran the diagnostic 4 times with 2 different spell sets. The charm identification is unambiguous. She paused. And the signatures are unambiguous. Amelia looked at her. All 67 bear the same caster's signature, Poppy said. All of them. The oldest and the newest and everything in between. You're certain? I'm certain. Say the name, Poppy. For the record. Amelia gestured to the junior Auror, who had produced a quick quotes quill and a notebook. Out loud. Poppy looked at the scan crystal and the cold layered architecture of 67 deliberate violations, and she said it. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The quill scratched. The infirmary was very quiet. Amelia sat down in the chair across from Poppy's desk, which was the first time Poppy had ever seen her sit down in a non-social context, and put both hands flat on the table and looked at the space between them. He wrote me, Amelia said. Last night. Very pleasant letter. Expressed his hope that we could discuss this privately before any formal proceedings, talked about the complexity of wartime decisions, mentioned the prophecy 3 times without actually telling me what it says. She looked up. He's going to say these were protective. They weren't protective, Poppy said flatly. A healer could argue that the first 2 or 3 suppression charms, placed at 14 months during a period of core instability following a major curse deflection, might have a protective rationale. A stretch, but arguable. The dependency charm placed at age 2 has no protective rationale. The self-worth suppressor placed at age 3 has no protective rationale. The loyalty compulsion, her voice developed an edge she didn't bother filing off. There is no version of child protection that requires a loyalty compulsion targeted at a specific individual's magical signature. His signature. His signature, yes. Amelia was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to see the boy. He's sleeping. I know. I'll wait. She didn't have to wait long. Harry had, Poppy was noticing, an instinct for when things were happening that needed his attention. He appeared in the infirmary doorway 12 minutes later in the oversized pajamas she'd transfigured for him, hair doing something architectural, and he looked at Amelia Bones and the junior Auror with the calm, cataloging look that Poppy was already coming to recognize. He came in, climbed back onto the bed, and pulled the blanket over his knees, and then he looked at Amelia and said, "You're the one she wrote the letter to. The important one." Amelia's eyebrows went up. She looked at Poppy. Poppy shrugged slightly. "My name is Amelia Bones," Amelia said, pulling her chair around to face him. "I'm the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." "Do you know what that means?" Harry thought about it. "You catch people who break magic laws." "More or less. I also investigate them." She looked at him directly, none of the soft focused gentleness that some adults deployed around children, and Poppy watched Harry respond to that with something that looked like appreciation. He straightened slightly. "I need to ask you some things." "You don't have to answer anything you don't want to. Madam Pomfrey says you're very sharp, so I'm going to talk to you like you're sharp. Is that all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "Good. Tell me about the man with the beard." So Harry told her. He told it the same way he'd told Poppy, quietly and precisely, without dramatics, the memory of the old man at Privet Drive, the feeling of being turned down, the occasional dream he had about a woman's voice and green light that he'd learned not to mention to the Dursleys because it made Uncle Vernon angry. He told her about the cupboard and the locks and the meals that were sometimes full and often not, and he told her about the 3 rib fractures with the same flat effect he used for everything, the tone of someone describing facts that had long since been processed into the background. Amelia listened without interrupting. The quill scratched steadily. When he finished she said, "You're doing very well. One more question. When Madam Pomfrey told you about the charms last night, what you told me you were told, how did that make you feel?" Harry considered the question seriously. "Like a puzzle piece," he said. Now the puzzle makes more sense. But I already knew something was wrong. I could feel where the edges of my magic were too close in. Like a room that's too small." He paused. "I've been in rooms that are too small. It felt like that." Amelia looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind her monocle. "Thank you, Harry," she said. She stood and jerked her head at Poppy, and they moved to the far end of the infirmary, and Amelia spoke in a low voice with her back to Harry. "I need a full copy of the diagnostic for the DMLE file," she said. "Official custody order, I'll have it drawn up within the hour. He goes into ministry-supervised foster placement tonight. I'm also pulling every file we have on Harry Potter going back to November of 1981, including the placement decisions." "Who authorized Privet Drive?" "I assumed, don't assume. I want the paper trail." Amelia's voice had the quality of a blade being sharpened. "And I'm opening the black case." Poppy blinked. "Sirius Black. Harry Potter's godfather. Currently in Azkaban." Has been since November 1981. Amelia's jaw was tight. I went back through the files last night when your letter came. Poppy, Sirius Black was never tried. No Wisengamot hearing. No formal charges filed. He was placed in Azkaban on Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s direct order within 48 hours of his arrest. The silence stretched. That's not, Poppy stopped. That's not legal. No, Amelia said. It's not. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the one person with both the legal standing to claim guardianship of Harry Potter and the personal motivation to ask very uncomfortable questions about his welfare has spent the last 4 years in Azkaban without trial. She looked at the door. Someone wanted that boy controllable and alone. I intend to find out exactly how many decisions that someone made to ensure it. Poppy thought about the letter on her desk. I'd very much like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. He wrote to me too, she said. Dumbledore. Last night. I know. He wrote to half the Wisengamot as well, which tells you something about how seriously he's taking this. Amelia paused. Don't meet with him. Not yet. Not without me or a witness. He's very persuasive, Poppy, and I don't say that as a compliment. I know who he is. Everyone knows who he is. That's rather the problem. Amelia picked up her satchel. I need 3 hours. I'll have the custody paperwork, a writ for Black's records, and an emergency Wisengamot motion filed by 9 o'clock. She paused at the door and looked back at Harry, who had retrieved a book from Poppy's bedside shelf, a basic magical theory primer she kept for bored long-term patients, and was reading it with the fixed concentration of someone drinking water after a long thirst. Do you have any idea what his actual magical capacity is? Without the charms. I only removed 2 last night. Basic suppression, the oldest ones. But even with those 2 removed, the core readings this morning were, Poppy chose her word carefully. Remarkable. Off the standard scale for his age. Off the scale for most adults. Amelia looked at her. Then at Harry. Then back. Keep him safe, she said, and left. The next 3 hours were some of the strangest of Poppy's professional life, not because of the legal machinery grinding into motion somewhere over her head, but because of Harry. He read the magical theory primer cover to cover in about 90 minutes, which should have been impossible for a 5-year-old who had received no formal education, and then set it down and asked her if she had anything more advanced. She gave him a second-year charms textbook on a whim, expecting him to bounce off it, and watched him work his way through the first chapter with his lower lip caught between his teeth and his fingers tracing the diagrams. This bit here, he said, pointing to a diagram of wand motion. The looping, that's about directing the magic, isn't it? Like steering. The words are the instructions but the motion is the direction. That's, essentially correct, yes. Where did you? I was thinking about what you said. About my magic having edges that were too close in. If there's more of it now, it needs somewhere to go. I was trying to understand how it works. He looked at her with those startling eyes. Can I try? Just something small. She should have said no. She should have said they needed to wait, they needed to go slowly, they needed specialist assessment before he attempted any active magic with his core in its current partially unbound state. All of this was true and she believed all of it. She said, something very small. He looked at the empty cup on her bedside table. He looked at the pitcher of water across the room. He held out one hand, no wand, wandless, which at his age with his core partially still suppressed should have been like trying to start a car with half an engine, and he concentrated with the focused, absolute stillness of someone who had spent years learning how to be perfectly still, and the pitcher floated gently across the room and tilted and filled the cup. Without spilling a drop. Poppy looked at the cup. Harry looked at the cup. That was larger than I meant, he said thoughtfully, in the tone of someone who had aimed for a pebble and thrown a boulder. Yes, she agreed, in the tone of someone recalibrating several things at once. He put his hand down and settled back against the pillows with the expression of someone who had just confirmed a hypothesis. "When the rest come off," he said, and didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The second wave arrived at 9:15. Not Amelia alone this time. She brought 2 additional Aurors, a ministry legal official named Croker who introduced himself with the exhausted precision of someone who had been drafting documents since 6 in the morning, and, trailing behind them all with an expression that Poppy had never seen on her face before, Minerva McGonagall. Minerva had clearly traveled fast. Her robes were slightly wind-rumpled and her hat was not at its usual impeccable angle, and she had the look of someone who had been experiencing controlled devastation since yesterday evening and had refined it during the journey into something sharper and colder and more purposeful. She came through the door and her eyes went straight to Harry, and something happened in her face, the recognition, the green eyes, the dark hair, the scar, and she stopped walking for just a moment. Harry looked at her with interest. "You knew my mum," he said. Minerva blinked. "Yes." "How did you? You looked at me like you recognized me but then looked sad." "That's usually either someone who knew my parents or someone who knows about," he touched his forehead briefly, "this." Minerva closed her mouth. She looked at Poppy. Poppy raised her eyebrows in a way that said yes, he's been doing this all morning. "I did know your mother," Minerva said, pulling herself together with visible effort and sitting in the chair nearest his bed. "She was one of the finest students I ever taught. My name is Minerva McGonagall. I teach Transfiguration at Hogwarts, and I'm the deputy headmistress." "So you work for Dumbledore," Harry said, without particular accusation in his voice. "Just fact." The tiny flinch on Minerva's face was not tiny enough to escape a child who had spent 5 years reading adult reactions for information. "I work at Hogwarts," she said carefully. "Which Dumbledore currently leads, yes. Did you know about the charms?" "No," Minerva said, and there was nothing careful about that. It came out hard and immediate and genuine. "I did not know. I want to be very clear about that." Harry looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, the same small decisive nod, and appeared to file her into a different category than he'd started with. "Okay," he said. "Poppy said you sent a letter. About him putting me here. You told him I shouldn't be with the Dursleys." Minerva went very still. "You read my letter?" "No. But she said you were upset, and this is Hogwarts, so if you're upset about where I live it means you came here before. To this place. To put me there." He looked at her with that clear gaze. "You left me there." "I." Minerva pressed her lips together. "I left a letter. I voiced my concerns to Dumbledore and he overruled me and she stopped." "You let him," Harry said. "Simple. Without cruelty but without softening either." Minerva McGonagall had not cried in front of a student in 40 years. "Yes," she said quietly. "I let him. And I am sorry, Harry. Deeply, genuinely sorry. It doesn't fix what happened, and I'm not asking you to, I know," he said. Then, with a directness that was somehow more forgiving than elaborate reassurance would have been, "You're trying to fix it now. That matters more." Minerva looked at him, and Poppy saw something settle in her, a decision, the kind that reformed the architecture of a person, quiet but seismic. "Yes," Minerva said. "I am." Across the room, the legal machinery was clicking into motion. Croker was spreading documents across Poppy's desk with the systematic efficiency of a man who had done this in difficult circumstances before and had developed a procedure. The custody order went first, Poppy signed it, then Amelia countersigned, and Harry Potter was legally removed from Petunia Dursley's care with the scratch of 2 quills. Then the formal DMLE investigation filing, which Amelia signed with the decisive stroke of someone who had been waiting to make it since 6 a.m., the black case, one of the Aurors said quietly, handing Amelia a folder. Amelia opened it and scanned it, and the expression on her face was the expression of someone finding what they'd expected but still being enraged by it. "No trial transcript," she said. Because there was no trial. No evidence log. No formal charges. Technically all we have is Crouch's arrest authorization, which is not, I want to be very precise about this, sufficient to imprison someone in Azkaban for 4 years. She closed the folder. I'm filing an emergency review with the Wisengamot. If Black's detention is found to be unlawful, which it will be, because it is, we're looking at immediate release pending formal hearing. He'll need Veritaserum, one of the Aurors said. Standard 4, I'm aware of standard procedure, thank you. Amelia set the folder down. The question of whether he's actually guilty of anything remains open until I review the evidence. What I can say with certainty is that he was never given the opportunity to present a defense, which means we don't actually know. Harry, who had been listening to all of this with the book open in his lap but his attention clearly elsewhere, said, Sirius Black. He's my godfather, isn't he? Everyone in the room looked at him. I heard his name. Yesterday. And you're all making a face like it's important. He looked at Amelia. Is he in trouble? He's been in prison, Amelia said, and she said it plainly, because she had clearly also evaluated Harry and decided he was owed the truth. For 4 years. We believe he may not have received a fair process. Harry processed this. He's been in prison for 4 years without a trial, he said, and it wasn't a question because he'd read enough into their expressions to already know the answer. And he was supposed to look after me. Yes, Amelia said. So he's in prison, and I'm in a cupboard, and there are 67 charms on my magic. Harry said it all as one sentence, flat and factual, and the sum of it lay in the room like a stone. That didn't all happen by accident. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The door opened. Albus Dumbledore walked in without knocking. He was exactly as Poppy had expected him to look, tall, unhurried, his silver beard immaculately arranged, his robes a deep midnight blue with tiny silver stars that actually moved. He had the half-moon glasses and the particular quality of presence that had always made rooms feel slightly smaller, not because he dominated them aggressively but because he occupied them completely, like a planet subtly warping the space around it. He looked at the assembled group with an expression of warm, serene concern, and his blue eyes went around the room and landed on Harry, and he smiled. It was an extraordinary smile. Warm, paternal, overflowing with what looked exactly like love. Harry looked at it with absolutely no expression at all. Albus, Amelia said, and her voice had the quality of a door being closed. This is an active DMLE investigation. You weren't invited. My dear Amelia, this is my school, he said pleasantly. And these are my colleagues, and that young man is someone I care about very deeply. I think you'll find it's quite natural that I should. I'll find nothing of the kind, Amelia said. You are a person of interest in this investigation. Attending the examination of a victim while being a person of interest is either obstruction or an attempt at witness intimidation, and I'll leave it to you to decide which you prefer to be charged with. The warmth didn't leave Dumbledore's face. It just became something that performed warmth from slightly farther away. Poppy, he said, pivoting smoothly. You've been through quite an ordeal. I think perhaps a conversation, just the two of us, might. No, Poppy said. His eyebrows rose. I beg your pardon. No. I received your letter. My answer is no. She kept her eyes on him. I've been a healer for 31 years, Albus, and I know the difference between a protective enchantment and a compulsion charm. And I know your signature. The warmth recalibrated again. He looked at her over his glasses with that look she'd seen him give to many people over the years, students, staff, ministry officials, the look that said I understand more than you do, and I am patient enough to wait for you to realize it. The charms you found were placed in Harry's best interests, he said, calmly and completely, as if saying so settled it. The full context is, the child has 3 healed rib fractures, Minerva said from across the room, and her voice was so cold it practically dropped the temperature. Dumbledore looked at her, and something shifted, very slightly, in his face. Minerva, don't. She was on her feet. She had, at some point, become very still in the way that people became still when they were preventing themselves from doing something dramatic. Don't explain. Not to me. Not right now. She looked at him with something that might have been the remains of 60 years of trust burning down to the foundations. Did you know what they were doing to him? The Dursleys are not ideal, did you know? The room was absolutely silent. I knew the environment was difficult, Dumbledore said, and the smoothness of it, the clean, careful selection of that particular phrase, was somehow worse than anything else he could have said. I believed the difficulties were necessary. Harry needed to be humbled. He needed to understand sacrifice. He was 5 years old, Poppy said. Her voice was perfectly level. He is 5 years old. Right now. He is sitting in that bed, and he is 5. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry looked back. And this was the moment Poppy would remember for the rest of her life, because Harry Potter, 5 years old, malnourished, with 65 compulsion charms still layered on his magical core, looked at the most powerful wizard in Britain with those clear green eyes and said, very quietly and with no fear at all, I know what you did. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the grandfatherly warmth had been set aside, and what was left was something older and colder and more honest. You are a remarkable child, Harry. Don't, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. I beg don't call me remarkable. You put things on my magic so I'd be quiet and easy and like you. You don't get to be proud of me for being sharp now. Harry's voice was calm. Not angry, 5-year-olds were angry. This was something more precise. Why did you do it? The room held its breath. Dumbledore looked at the boy for a long moment. And Poppy watched him make a decision, the decision to be honest, at least partially, probably because he had calculated that partial honesty was better strategy here than a lie that might unravel. There is a prophecy, he said. About you, and about a great evil that must be faced. I needed to ensure that when the time came, you would be, he paused, selecting his word. Ready. Ready how? Harry said. Willing to do what is necessary. Even when it is very hard. Even when the cost is very high. Harry looked at him for a long, long moment. You wanted me to think I didn't matter, Harry said. So I'd give myself up. So I'd let myself be used. The silence that followed was as loud as anything Poppy had ever heard. Amelia was very still, and Poppy could see her listening with the complete focused attention of someone collecting evidence, and Minerva had gone the color of chalk, and Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that was the most honest thing she'd seen on his face since he walked in, and it was terrible because it was sad, and it was sad because he genuinely believed he was right, and you could see it. You could see that what he'd done had never, for a single moment, felt like a crime to him. I wanted you to be brave enough to save everyone, Dumbledore said softly. Sometimes that requires, get out, Amelia said. Not loudly. Just with absolute finality, the way you said something when there was no version of the world in which you were going to say anything else. Dumbledore looked at her. Then, slowly, he looked around the room, and something in the quality of what he found there, all those faces, even Poppy's, even the junior Aurors, even the legal official who had technically never met him before today, made him understand that he had misjudged the situation. He had come in expecting to manage it. He left without another word, and the door closed behind him, and the room breathed. Harry was looking at the door. His expression was hard to read, and then it wasn't, because Poppy had been watching his face for 24 hours and she was learning its language. He was angry. Not the 5-year-old kind. The deep, directed kind that found a shape and kept it. He's not done, Harry said. He thinks he can still fix this. He thinks we'll all come around. He paused. He's wrong. Yes, Amelia said. He is. She pulled out a fresh piece of parchment and began writing with the focused energy of someone who had been building to this for some time. I'm filing for a Wisengamot emergency session, she said, without looking up. Unauthorized use of compulsion and suppression charms on a minor, illegal imprisonment of Sirius Black, child endangerment by placement, and abuse of power by a public official. I will need formal depositions from both of you by this evening. She looked up briefly. Poppy. I want a certified copy of every diagnostic you've run. Every one. Dated, signed, sealed. Done, Poppy said. Minerva. You filed a formal concern about Harry's placement on the night of November the 1st, 1981. I need that letter, the original, if it still exists. Minerva reached into her robes and produced it immediately, already folded and ready, and the fact that she'd brought it meant she'd decided last night, before she even arrived, what she was going to do. Right then, Amelia said, and there was something deeply satisfying in the way she said it, something that had been wound tight and was now finally, cleanly, moving. Let's begin. The afternoon was a procession of careful, precise work. Poppy ran 2 more diagnostics while Amelia watched, this time with the DMLE's own charm identification specialist, a quiet woman named Huxley who had the myopic intensity of someone who saw the world primarily through a magnification lens, and who examined the scan projection for 20 minutes without speaking and then confirmed every one of Poppy's identifications and added 3 that Poppy had flagged as uncertain. The loyalty compulsion is particularly fine work, Huxley said, in the detached professional tone of someone complimenting craftsmanship on a murder weapon. Layer integration is seamless. Placed approximately 18 months after the initial suppression charms, you can see how it was woven into the existing structure, using the first layer as a foundation. Whoever placed this had done it before. It's unique, Poppy said. The signature is, no, Huxley said. It's not unique. I've seen this signature twice before. Once on an object, once on a person. She turned from the projection to look at them both. The person was a Hogwarts student, 1971. Brought to St. Mungo's presenting with inexplicable anxiety and dependency behaviors. The charms weren't found until years later, they'd been removed by then, but the old scan evidence was in the St. Mungo's archive. The student's name was, who? Amelia said. Huxley looked at her. Tom Riddle. Another silence, this one with a different texture. Dumbledore practiced on Voldemort, Poppy said, and the sentence felt strange in her mouth, like a sentence from a story she hadn't realized she was living in. I don't know the context, Huxley said carefully. I only know what the scan records showed. She paused. But the technique is identical. The loyalty compulsion in the 1971 case was targeted to a different signature. Not Dumbledore's own. Someone else's, someone the student was meant to become loyal to. She looked at the projection. In Harry Potter's case, the loyalty compulsion is targeted to Dumbledore himself. After Huxley left, the infirmary was quiet for a few minutes. Harry had fallen asleep again. The removal of 2 more charms that Poppy had carefully excised during the afternoon had triggered the exhaustion that typically followed core realignment work, and he was deeply under, curled on his side with his hand pressed flat against the mattress as though he wanted to feel something solid. Poppy sat beside his bed. Amelia sat across from her. He practiced the technique on Voldemort, Amelia said, quietly, because Harry was sleeping and also because it was the kind of thing you said quietly. Tried to control him. Probably failed, given the outcome. Then refined it. Used it on Harry. The dependent the first time, Poppy said, following the logic. He tried to make Riddle loyal to someone, maybe himself, maybe someone else, we don't know. And when that either failed or produced Voldemort anyway, he concluded the problem was the direction of loyalty, not the method. She looked at Harry's sleeping face. So this time he aimed it at himself. Because he trusts himself to make the right decision, Amelia said. Because in his own mind he's the one who knows best. Always. She was quiet for a moment. I've known Albus Dumbledore for 30 years. I've always known he was difficult, that his methods were his own, that he played a longer game than the rest of us. I told myself that was wisdom. She stood up. It's not wisdom. It's just control with better branding. She picked up her satchel. The Wisengamot session is the day after tomorrow, she said. I'm going to Azkaban tomorrow morning. I'll pull Black out myself if I have to. She paused at the door and looked back. He's going to need someone, Poppy. When Black is released, assuming the evidence is what I think it is, he'll need time and support before he can be anyone's primary carer. Which means in the interim, Harry needs, I'm aware, Poppy said. Are you volunteering? I'm a healer, not a foster carer. You could be both, temporarily. Poppy looked at Harry. At the thin, sleeping face and the small hand against the mattress. She thought about 6 this morning, when he'd asked her if it hurt and said ready with that deliberate steadiness. I'm already both, she said. Temporarily. Amelia nodded once, the decisive nod of someone who has correctly predicted an outcome. Lock down the infirmary again tonight. And Poppy, I know. He'll try again. He won't come in himself, not after this morning. But he'll try. I know, Poppy said again. Let him try. After Amelia left and the junior Auror and Croaker left and Minerva stayed for another hour and then left as well, the infirmary settled into its evening quiet. The enchanted lights dimmed themselves on a timer. The fire crackled low. Outside the high windows the grounds were going dark and somewhere an owl called, once, and was answered. Harry slept through all of it. At some point around 9 o'clock he woke briefly, looked at her, said, "Still here," in a voice blurred with sleep, and she said yes, and he said good and went back under. Poppy sat in her chair and thought about 67 charms and a boy who was made to be a sacrifice and a man who thought he was saving the world. She thought about Tom Riddle in 1971, some scan in an archive that nobody had connected to anything until today. She thought about the shape of what Dumbledore had been building for how long, decades, maybe, a plan so large and so patient that it had become, to him, simply the truth of how things were. She thought about Harry saying he's wrong. She thought about Harry saying I know what you did with absolutely no fear in his voice. She removed 2 more charms before she went to sleep, the smallest and most integrated of the self-worth suppressors, working with a delicacy that left her wrist aching. She worked by wand light with the focused precision of someone dismantling a lock without the key, and when each one released there was a very quiet sound, barely audible, like the first breath after someone's been holding theirs. 63 left. She was getting to them all. Chapter 3, The boy who remembered Sirius Black had not seen the sun in 4 years. He'd seen light, the gray, grudging light that fell through the high barred slot that passed for a window in cell block 9, but light and sun were different things, and the difference was the kind of thing you only understood after you'd been without the second one long enough to forget what it felt like on your face. He was sitting on the floor when they came for him. Not because there was no cot, there was, bolted to the wall, thin as a rumor, but because the floor was cold and the cold helped. The cold was something real. The cold kept the Dementor fog from settling too thick, kept the edges of himself from dissolving into the grey soup of misery that Azkaban constantly pressed at you from all sides like a physical weight. He heard footsteps in the corridor and didn't look up. Footsteps meant food or shift change or, occasionally, someone in a worse cell than his having what the guards euphemistically called an episode. None of these things required him to move. The footsteps stopped outside his cell. Sirius Black. He looked up. The woman standing outside the bars was broad-shouldered, gray-streaked, and wearing aura robes that were somehow pristine despite the fact that she'd clearly walked through the same corrosive Dementor-soaked air that had been eating at him for 4 years. She had a monocle and a folder and the expression of someone who had been angry for several days and had refined it into something extremely productive. He stared at her. "Amelia Bones," she said. "Head of the DMLE. I need you to answer some questions. If your answers are what I believe they'll be, you'll be leaving with me today." Sirius opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "Harry," he said. His voice was wrecked, 4 years of disuse and damp had done things to it. Harry is safe," she said. "He's at Hogwarts. That's part of why I'm here." She looked at him with the direct, evaluative look of someone taking inventory. "Can you stand up?" He could. It took a moment, and his legs were not entirely cooperative, but he could. "Good," she said, and unlocked the cell door. The Wisingamot session was in 2 days. Poppy knew this because Amelia sent a memo at 7 in the morning, and because the memo was followed within the hour by an extremely uncomfortable knock on the infirmary door. She opened it to find 2 people she hadn't expected to see this soon. One was Hestia Jones, a healer colleague from St. Mungo's who specialized in magical core restoration and who Poppy had oled the previous afternoon with a carefully worded request. The other was Augusta Longbottom, in full formal robes at 8 in the morning, who had apparently decided to come to Hogwarts herself rather than wait for correspondence. "Augusta," Poppy said. "Don't Augusta me, Poppy, I've been up since 5. She swept in with the decisive momentum of a woman who had never learned to hesitate. "The Wisingamot motion is all anyone's talking about. Half of them think it's a mistake and the other half think it's 30 years overdue, and I will tell you which half I'm in if you'll let me sit down." "The second half," Hestia said pleasantly, coming in behind her and setting her healer's bag on Poppy's desk. "Morning, Poppy. Where's the boy?" Harry was awake, which Poppy had expected, and had been awake for at least an hour, which she'd also expected, because the speed at which he appeared to require sleep was decreasing in direct proportion to the number of charms being removed. 2 more had come off in the night. She'd removed them while he slept, small ones, a pair of linked communication blockers that had been preventing him from clearly projecting or receiving magical intent, the kind of low-level suppression that kept a wizard from sensing the magical environment around them. She'd removed those, and by morning Harry had told her, with the tone of someone reporting a weather observation, that the castle felt different. That it had sound she didn't think he was hearing with his ears. That it was very old and very awake and somewhat pleased to have him there. She had not told him that Hogwarts was sentient. She hadn't had to. He was sitting up in bed reading when Hestia came through the door, and he put the book down and looked at the new arrivals with his systematic assessment, and then looked at Hestia's bag with specific interest. "You're the one who's going to take more of them off," he said. "That's the plan," Hestia said, pulling a chair to his bedside and opening the bag. "I've reviewed Poppy's diagnostic data. I've been a core restoration specialist for 15 years, and I want to be honest with you, some of these are complex. The removal will feel odd, but it shouldn't hurt. Some of them have been integrated with your natural core development, which means removing them requires a bit more finesse." She looked at him directly. "You'll need to tell me immediately if anything feels wrong. Can you do that?" "Yes," Harry said. "Then, what happens when they're all gone? What does it feel like?" "I don't know," Hestia said, with the honesty of someone who had reviewed a unique case and was prepared to admit its uniqueness. In normal core restoration work, patients report a feeling of expansion. Like breathing deeply after shallow breaths for a long time. In your case, she glanced at the diagnostic projection she'd produced from her bag, studying it. Your core readings are already beyond standard scale with 63 still in place. I genuinely don't know what the full removal will produce." Harry looked at the projection with interest rather than apprehension. "Let's find out," he said. Augusta Longbottom had settled into the chair across the room and was watching all of this with sharp, dark eyes. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, who had survived the war and the loss of her son and daughter-in-law to torture with the unyielding, angular dignity of someone who had decided grief was a thing to be metabolized rather than displayed. "You look like your father," she told Harry, which was apparently her version of an introduction. He considered this. "People usually say I look like my mum. Except for the eyes. James Potter had your jaw set the same way." She tilted her head. "I knew your parents. Not closely, but I knew them. James was arrogant as a second year and had mostly grown out of it by his 7th. Lily was the most magically gifted student of her generation, which she knew and was appropriately humble about, which is harder than it sounds. She paused. You have both of those things already, at 5, which is either very promising or going to give everyone a significant headache. Probably both, Harry said, in the tone of someone who had thought about this. Augusta looked at him for a moment, and then, very slightly, smiled. It was the kind of smile that Augusta Longbottom apparently kept in reserve for things that had genuinely surprised her. Yes, she said. Probably both. Hestia worked through the morning. She was methodical and precise, removing the charms in a sequence she determined the previous night based on the diagnostic data, working from the outside in, taking the most recently placed and most accessible first, leaving the deeply integrated earliest placed charms for last. Each removal involved a complicated piece of spell work that looked, to Poppy's watching eyes, like someone carefully unpicking stitches from living tissue. The charms were part of him now, woven into 4 years of magical development, and removing them without damage required patience that Hestia clearly had in abundance. Harry sat through it with remarkable stillness. He reported each sensation as it happened. That one felt like something relaxing that I didn't know was tight, that one felt like a door closing and then opening wider, that one, he paused, with an expression that was difficult to read. That one felt like remembering something I forgot. The self-worth suppressor. What did you remember? Poppy asked. He thought about it. I don't know exactly. Just, he pressed his lips together. Like I mattered. Like I was allowed to matter. He said it with the flat empirical tone he used for everything, but his hands, Poppy noticed, had tightened in the blanket. I didn't know I'd stopped believing that. The room was quiet. Augusta cleared her throat. Well, she said briskly, which meant she was affected and had decided to address it through momentum. As a practical matter, Harry, you absolutely matter. You matter so much that the Wisengamot is convening an emergency session the day after tomorrow on your behalf. Which means that in approximately 36 hours you will be at the center of the most significant political event in British magical society since you know who's first defeat. She straightened her extraordinary hat. I find it useful, in those situations, to prepare. Amelia Bones will argue the legal case. But politics is not always about law, and the Wisengamot is not entirely composed of people who are interested in pure legal argument. What are they interested in? Harry asked. Power, tradition, fear, loyalty, and occasionally justice, roughly in that order. Augusta looked at him steadily. Dumbledore has held the chief warlock position for 20 years. He has deep alliances in that chamber. He will argue that the charms were protective, that the prophecy required specific preparations, and that his intentions were benevolent. He will do this graciously and with a great deal of warmth, and approximately a third of the chamber will find it convincing regardless of the evidence. So we need more than evidence, Harry said. Augusta looked mildly surprised, then not. In the Wisengamot, yes. Evidence is necessary but not sufficient. You need, narrative, Harry said. He'd gone back to his thinking look, the one where his eyes focused on a point slightly past whatever was in front of him. He has a story. The wise old man protecting everyone including the boy who doesn't know better yet. We need a better story. He was 5. Poppy reminded herself of this, and it didn't help, because the architecture of what he'd just said was entirely accurate. What story would you tell? Augusta asked, with the deliberate carefulness of someone testing load-bearing weight. Harry thought about it for a long moment. The truth, he said. Not as a list of what he did. As, what it means. A man who decided one boy's life wasn't worth as much as everyone else's. Who engineered a child to be a weapon and then put him in a cupboard until it was time to use him. And who called that love? His voice stayed level but the words had edges. People understand that. Everyone's been told their life matters less than something bigger. Everyone's been told to be grateful for what they have. When they see what grateful and compliant actually looks like up close, he gestured to himself, simply, without drama. Augusta looked at him for a long, charged moment. Amelia needs to hear this, she said, and reached for her wand to send a message. The afternoon brought two things: Hestia removing 14 more charms in a careful 2-hour session that left Harry vibrating with a slightly too bright energy that she said was entirely normal and would settle within a day, and the arrival, unexpected and unannounced and accompanied by the particular chaos of a man who had not been managing his stress well, of Remus Lupin. He came through the flue while Hestia was packing her bag and Harry was eating an enormous quantity of food with the focused appreciation of someone whose appetite had been aggressively suppressed by compulsion charms and general malnutrition and was now making up for lost time. He came through looking like someone had put him through a mangle, thin, shabby robe, grey already threading through brown hair at 31, the particular hollowness around the eyes of someone who regularly dealt with something that took a great deal out of them. He came through and saw Harry and stopped dead. Harry looked up from his food. The two of them looked at each other for a moment, and something moved in Remus's face that was too complicated to categorize neatly, grief and recognition and something fierce that was trying hard not to collapse into something else. "You have James's hair," Remus said. His voice was doing something difficult. "It doesn't do what it's told." "I know," Harry said. "Poppy tried to brush it this morning." He tilted his head, reading Remus the way he read everyone, quick and thorough. "You knew my dad. You're upset." "But not," he frowned slightly. "You're not upset at me. You're upset for me. That's different." Remus sat down heavily in the nearest chair. He pressed one hand over his mouth for a moment, staring at Harry. "Sirius sent a Patronus," he said, "to Poppy, because he needed to say something functional or he was going to not be functional. Yesterday evening. From Azkaban, which I didn't know was possible, but apparently when Amelia Bones brought him a wand for the statement interview he stopped. They're releasing him. Today. Amelia Bones is bringing him today." Poppy had known this was coming. She still felt the news land with weight. "Is he?" she started. "I don't know," Remus said honestly. "For years in Azkaban. I don't know what state he's in." He looked at Harry, who had set down his spoon and was listening with complete attention. "He's going to want to see you. He talked about you," his voice caught. He restarted. "He talked about you constantly, before. You and your parents. He's your godfather." "I know," Harry said. "Amelia told me." He paused. Did he actually do what they said he did? Kill those people? Remus looked at him. "No," he said, quietly and with certainty. "No. I know he didn't. I know who did. He pressed his lips together. We didn't have anyone who believed us." "Who did?" Harry asked. Remus hesitated. "You don't have to tell me if it's complicated," Harry said. "I'll find out anyway." The corner of Remus's mouth did something that was not quite a smile. "Peter Pettigrew," he said. "A man we trusted. He betrayed your parents to Voldemort and faked his own death and let Sirius take the blame." He watched Harry's face while he said this, clearly prepared for a reaction. "We thought he was dead. We were wrong." Harry absorbed this with the stillness of someone who was doing several things at once internally. "Then, where is he now?" "We're not sure. Sirius will know more than I do. Or he'll know what he knew 4 years ago." Remus sat back. "Why?" "Because if he's alive and hiding, we should find him," Harry said, with the pragmatic simplicity of someone stating the obvious. "He's the evidence. If Sirius needs proof," he looked at Remus steadily. "You said you didn't have anyone who believed you. That's different from not having proof." Remus stared at him. "You need the right people and the right proof," Harry said. "Amelia Bones is the right people. And you know where he'd hide." He looked at Remus. "You tracked things for a living once, didn't you? I can tell. You move like you're paying attention to everything." The silence was the particular kind that followed statements that were entirely accurate. I was an Auror, Remus said. For 2 years. After the war, before, he gestured to himself vaguely, meaning the affliction he hadn't mentioned and didn't need to because Harry had clearly filed it already. I can track. And you're right that I have an idea where Peter would go. He was always, his expression tightened. He always went to whoever he thought was safest. Strongest. Voldemort's people, Harry said. Or somewhere that looked like hiding. A rat hole. He said the last 2 words with a precision that was its own kind of contempt. Harry nodded. Tell Amelia Bones, he said. Before the session. If you find Peter and bring him in before the Wisengamot convenes, the case against Sirius dissolves entirely. And it probably helps my case too, because, he paused, and Poppy watched him work through a line of reasoning. Because it shows the pattern. The same person who covered up Sirius's innocence put the charms on me. And the evidence against Sirius was thin and fast, the way you make a case when you want it to stick before anyone looks too closely. Same method. Same reason. He looked at Remus. Someone was tying up loose ends. Remus looked at the 5-year-old across the room for a long moment of profound disorientation. I'll Amelia, he said. Go in person, Harry said. Letters can be intercepted. And this matters more than the time it takes to travel. Remus went in person. Sirius Black arrived at Hogwarts at 3:30 in the afternoon, escorted by 2 Aurors and Amelia Bones herself. He walked in under his own power, which Poppy took as a positive sign, though the walking was not entirely steady and he had the lean, brittle quality of someone who had been burning through reserve they didn't have. He was wearing borrowed robes, Amelia had sent someone to Diagon Alley, and his hair had been cleaned and tied back and it was still too long and too tangled, but his eyes were grey and sharp and, when he came through the infirmary door and saw Harry, went wide and stayed wide. Harry looked at him. Sirius looked at Harry. You're small, Sirius said, which was clearly not what he'd planned to say. You're thin, Harry replied. The corner of Sirius's mouth cracked upward, and for a moment through the ravaged lines of 4 years in Azkaban you could see the person he'd been before, reckless and bright and deeply, stubbornly devoted. He crossed the room and crouched down to Harry's level and looked at him with an expression that was trying to contain too many things at once. James would be so, he started, and couldn't finish it. Don't, Harry said, but gently. Not the sharp don't he'd used with Dumbledore. Gentler. The way you said don't to someone you were already starting to trust. Not yet. Just, be here first. You can do the rest later. Sirius blinked. Then he sat on the floor, because the chair was too far and he clearly needed to not be upright for a moment, and he sat with his back against the wall beside Harry's bed and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. His shoulders shook once. Then he put his hands down and looked at the ceiling. Your godfather is sitting on my floor, Poppy said. I can see that, Harry said. He looked at Sirius. Is the floor okay? The floor is great, Sirius said, from the ceiling. The floor is the best floor I've ever been on. The floor is magnificent. I haven't sat on a floor that wasn't made of stone in 4 years and this floor is, his voice did something complicated. It's fine. I'm fine. He looked sideways at Harry. Are you fine? Getting better, Harry said. They're taking the charms off. 53 down, 14 more to go. Sirius's expression shifted into something that was not fine at all. I should have, he stopped. Restarted. When your parents died, I should have picked you up. I should have come straight to you. Instead he pressed his lips together. I chased Peter. I was so angry he was there, Harry said. In the house with my parents when Voldemort came. He told Voldemort where they were. Sirius went very still. How do you know that? Remus told me. And I know where he'd hide. Harry looked at him steadily. Will you help find him? The stillness shifted into something else, purposeful, sharpening. For years in Azkaban had burned away a lot of things, but it had apparently not touched the instinct of a man who had been one of the best in his year when it came to this. You want me to help hunt Peter, Sirius said slowly. I want you to help Remus hunt Peter, yes. He needs to be found before the Wisengamot session day after tomorrow. His testimony, or Veritaserum results, will clear your name cleanly and absolutely. And Amelia Bones already has everything she needs on the other matter. He paused. Will you do it? Harry, Sirius said carefully. I just got out of Azkaban an hour ago. I know, Harry said. I'm sorry. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Sirius looked at him with the expression of someone experiencing a very specific kind of vertigo, the kind that came from recognizing something of yourself in someone else and finding it more than a little alarming. Fine, he said. Yes. Where's Remus? Amelia's office. He went to give her information. He'll come back when he's done. Harry looked at him. You should eat something first. You look like you haven't eaten for years. Yes, there's a theme, I've noticed. Sirius pushed himself to his feet with slightly more effort than he was trying to show. Is the food here still? I'll have the kitchen send something, Poppy said, already moving, because feeding people was the most straightforwardly useful thing she could do in this room at this moment. She heard Sirius settle into the chair by Harry's bed, and she heard Harry's voice, quieter now, asking something she couldn't make out, and she heard Sirius answer with a sound that was mostly exhale, and she gave them the privacy of her back while she arranged food and thought about what came next. What came next arrived the following morning in the form of something none of them had prepared for. Harry's magic got out. Not catastrophically, not in the sense of a magical explosion or a structural event. But Hestia had removed 6 more charms the previous evening, bringing the total to 11 remaining, and the cumulative effect of the restoration work was apparently reaching some kind of threshold, because Harry woke at 5 in the morning and every light in the infirmary was blazing full brightness, every plant on Poppy's windowsill had grown approximately 8 inches overnight, and the diagnostic crystals she kept stored in a cabinet were all glowing simultaneously with a warm amber light. Harry was sitting up in bed looking at his hands. Sorry, he said, without looking up. I was dreaming. Don't, Poppy said, because she'd startled awake at the light and come in already pulling on her robes. Don't try to suppress it. Just, let it settle on its own. Breathe. He breathed. The lights dimmed gradually, not all at once, the way something calmed down rather than being turned off. The plants didn't shrink back. The diagnostic crystals kept their glow. Harry looked at her. The green of his eyes was very bright in the room's residual amber light. I was dreaming about the night my parents died, he said. Not with distress, with that same empirical quality. I remember it. Not all of it, just parts. Green light. Her voice. He paused. She did something. My mom. When he stopped, frowning, reaching for a memory that was more sensation than image. She stood between me and it and she didn't have her wand. She could have run. She didn't. Poppy sat down beside him. No, she said. She didn't. That's not the charm working, he said. That's just her. That's who she was. Yes, Poppy said softly. That's who she was. He was quiet for a moment. The thing that happened when the curse hit me, that was because of what she did, wasn't it? The reason I survived. Yes. Magic that comes from, that kind of choice creates a protection that's very old and very powerful. Your mother understood that. She chose it deliberately. Harry looked at his hands again. The infirmary was warm and very still in the pre-dawn. She protected me, he said. And then someone put 67 charms on me. He said this without connecting them directly, but the connection was there, implicit and precise. She died so I'd be alive, and then someone spent the next 4 years making sure I'd be willing to die. He looked up. That makes me angry. That makes me angry too, Poppy said. Good. He lay back down, pulled the blanket up, and looked at the ceiling. We should be angry about it. It should make us very precise. She did not tell him to go back to sleep. She sat with him while the sky outside the windows went from black to the dark blue that preceded dawn, and they sat in companionable, sharp-edged silence, and Harry Potter worked through something that was too old for him to have to work through and did it anyway, with the stubborn, systematic thoroughness that she was beginning to understand was simply his nature. At 6:30 Sirius arrived with Remus. They had the slightly wild, sleep-deprived intensity of people who had been doing something consequential all night. Sirius had a cut on his hand that he was ignoring, and Remus was carrying a warded evidence box, which he set on Poppy's desk with a deliberate care that said something important was inside it. We found him, Remus said. Harry sat up. In a house in Yorkshire. He'd been there since. Remus paused. For a while. He's currently in DMLE custody. Amelia Bones was awake, which I think she may simply always be, and she had a team there within 20 minutes. He looked at the box. Veritaserum administered with full witness oversight. Complete confession. Pettigrew confirmed everything, betrayal of the Potters, faking his death, framing Sirius. He let out a long breath. It's over. The black case is over. Sirius was looking at the middle distance with an expression that was several things at once, none of them simple. He had been in Azkaban for 4 years for something he didn't do, and the evidence of his innocence was now in a box on a healer's desk in Hogwarts, and Poppy watched him process the distance between those two things and felt the weight of it. Hey, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. You're free, Harry said, quietly and simply. Not as a celebration, as a fact. As something being given back that had been wrongly taken. You're actually free now. Something broke open in Sirius's face. Just for a moment. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides and sat on the edge of Harry's bed and pulled him into a hug that was perhaps slightly too tight for Poppy's medical preferences and precisely right in every other way, and Harry, who had been learning over the last 3 days that being held was something he'd been wrong to not expect, put his arms around his godfather and held on. Remus sat on the floor on the other side of the room and pressed his forehead to his knees and breathed. Poppy put the kettle on. The Wisengamot session was tomorrow. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses were present, and the case was as airtight as anything she'd seen in 31 years of practicing in the magical world. And yet. She thought about what Augusta had said. About the third of the chamber that would find Dumbledore convincing regardless of evidence. About narrative and power and the long, patient game of a man who had been playing it longer than most people in that chamber had been alive. She made tea for 5 people and brought it around on a conjure tray, and when Harry took his cup he wrapped both hands around it and looked at her over the rim and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "What's his move tomorrow?" She considered the question seriously, because he deserved a serious answer. He'll acknowledge some of the charms, she said. The ones he can't credibly deny. He'll reframe them as protective measures taken during a period of extreme danger, without full disclosure of intent. He'll introduce the prophecy, selectively, to establish that there was genuine threat that required genuine preparation. He'll appeal to his history, his sacrifices, his record of service. He'll make it about love. She paused. And he'll ask the Wisengamot to trust his judgment, as they have always trusted his judgment, because nothing in their experience will have given them reason not to. Harry thought about this for a moment. Then we need to give them reason, he said. He set down his tea and pulled the blanket back, and for a moment he just sat on the edge of the bed, this small, thin boy, with his mother's eyes and his father's jaw and 11 fewer chains on his magic than he'd woken up with 3 days ago, and he looked at the room. At Sirius, who had his godson back. At Remus, who had his best friend back and a cleared name in a box on the desk. At Poppy, who had 31 years of professional certainty and a cold fury that had organized itself into purpose. "Tell Amelia," he said, "that I want to speak at the session." Everyone in the room looked at him. "You're 5 years old," Poppy said. "I know," Harry said, with the absolute equanimity of someone for whom this was a logistical consideration rather than a meaningful objection. "That's why it'll work." Chapter 4, Trials. The Wizengamot chamber was older than most of the people sitting in it, and it knew it. The walls were dark stone hung with tapestries that had stopped being decorative in the 14th century and graduated to historical record, the kind that moved when they thought no one was watching. The tiered seating curved in a horseshoe around a central floor where the accused stood, and the acoustics were designed to make every word spoken in that center space carry up and outward to every seat, an architectural feature that had over the centuries produced both great justice and significant theater. This morning it would produce both. Poppy arrived early with Harry, Sirius, and Remus, and Amelia Bones met them in the anteroom outside the main chamber doors with 2 oars and the expression of someone who had been awake for 36 hours and was running entirely on competence and principle. "The chamber is full," she said. "Every seat. Half of them came for the spectacle and half came because they've already decided how they're voting and want to watch it be official. Augusta Longbottom is in the neutral block. She's done 3 hours of chamber politicking since 6 this morning and she says 7 votes have shifted." She looked at Harry. "You sure about speaking?" "Yes," Harry said. Amelia looked at him for a moment with the evaluating directness she'd brought to every interaction with him. Then she nodded. "You'll go last. After I've presented the evidence, after Hestia's testimony, after the diagnostic data is in the record. Last, so it's what they're thinking about when they vote." She paused. "Dumbledore will speak. You'll have to sit through it." "I know," Harry said. "He'll be very, I know," Harry said again, without impatience. "It's fine. Let him go first." Sirius put a hand on Harry's shoulder, briefly. Harry reached up and put his hand over it for a second, then dropped it, and the two of them communicated something wordless in that half-second that Poppy had no access to but felt the weight of. "Right," Amelia said. "Let's go in." The chamber was indeed full. Poppy had been in the Wizengamot chamber twice before, once to testify in a medical malpractice case, once for a hearing related to a cursed artifact, and both times it had been perhaps 2/3 occupied. Today there was not an empty seat in the horseshoe, and a queue of observers had been allowed into the gallery that ran along the back wall, packed in shoulder to shoulder in the deliberate specific silence of people who were trying very hard not to miss anything. Dumbledore was already there. He was in the Chief Warlock's chair, which was the highest seat on the left-hand arc of the horseshoe, a chair with a back carved into the shape of spread wings that had always struck Poppy as trying slightly too hard. He was in deep purple robes today and his silver hair was arranged with its usual meticulous informality, and he looked exactly like what he was, the most powerful and respected wizard in the country, presiding over a session that had been called to examine what he'd done. He acknowledged their entrance with a small, composed nod that managed to convey both dignity and a kind of patient sorrow, as if he were already sorry for how this was going to go, for everyone involved. Harry didn't look at him. He sat in the witness seats along the chamber wall, the seats reserved for those present to testify rather than to vote, and he looked at the room. At the tapestries. At the architecture. At the faces in the tiers, the ones watching him, the ones watching each other. He read the room the way he read everything, systematic and quick, and Poppy sat beside him and felt the absolute quality of his calm like something physical. Madam Marchbanks, one of the eldest members and currently sitting in as procedural lead given that the session concerned the Chief Warlock, opened proceedings with the standard words. The chamber settled. Amelia stepped to the center floor. She was a naturally imposing woman who did nothing to diminish that impression, and she had the quality of complete precision, no wasted movement, no rhetorical flourish. She presented the case the way she'd built it, chronologically, evidentially, without emotion and therefore more devastating for it. She began with the welfare protocol trigger and Poppy's initial findings. She introduced the diagnostic data, projecting the crystal's display large enough for the entire chamber to see the rotating schematic with its 67 charmed layers lit in their coded colors. Several members of the Wisengamot who had presumably heard the basic facts already reacted to seeing the schematic. The number of charms rendered visually, the layered architecture of it, the sheer patience of construction, produced a different response than the same information conveyed in a report. Amelia let the schematic turn for 10 seconds before she said anything. She had good instincts for silence. 67 individual charms, she said then. Placed over a period of 4 years, beginning when the subject was 14 months old. The subject is currently 5 years of age and present in this chamber. She looked up at the tiers. All 67 bear an identical caster's signature. The caster's signature has been confirmed by the DMLE's specialist examiner, by 2 independent magical forensics analysts, and by healing records from St. Mungo's which identify the same signature on a charm placed on a different individual in 1971. She paused. The caster's identity is Albus Dumbledore. The chamber did not erupt. It was not the sort of chamber that erupted. But there was a quality of collective breath-holding, a tightening of the air, that said something significant had shifted. Amelia continued. She presented Hestia's testimony on the nature of each category of charm, the suppression charms, the dependency charm, the self-worth suppressor, the loyalty compulsion, and Hestia was crisp and clinical and meticulous and left no space for ambiguity about what each charm did or what effect it would have on a developing child's magical core and psychological formation. She presented the physical findings, the malnutrition, the growth suppression, the healed fractures, as a second and parallel axis of harm, distinct from the charms but connected by the same placement decision, Dumbledore's decision to leave Harry at Privet Drive. She presented the black case, the arrest, the lack of trial, Crouch's direct order, the 4 years in Azkaban. She presented Peter Pettigrew's Veritaserum confession from the previous night. She presented it all with the systematic completeness of someone who had anticipated every counterargument and preempted it with evidence. It took 40 minutes. When she stepped back, the chamber was very quiet. Dumbledore rose. He moved to the center floor with the unhurried dignity of a man who had stood in many rooms in many difficult moments and had not yet been defeated by one. He looked around the chamber with those blue eyes over his half-moon glasses, and he took a breath, and he began. Poppy had known it would be good. It was better than she'd prepared herself for. He acknowledged the charms immediately, which was its own tactical move. He didn't attempt to deny them, which meant he couldn't be seen to be caught in a lie and could instead control the framing from the start. He acknowledged them and named them and described them, and then he began to explain them. He spoke about the night of October 31st, 1981, with a quiet, steady voice that managed to convey both grief and resolve, the death of James and Lily Potter, the survival of Harry, the prophecy. He didn't quote the prophecy. He described its existence and its weight, the burden of knowledge that demanded impossible decisions. I have carried the prophecy for years, he said, and his voice was low enough that the chamber's acoustics had to do their work to carry it, which meant everyone was leaning slightly forward. I have lived with the knowledge of what is coming, of what must be faced, and I have made decisions, difficult, imperfect, painful decisions, in service of a single purpose, the protection of everyone in this room, everyone in this country, and most particularly the boy whose welfare this session concerns. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Something flickered in Dumbledore's eyes at that look. He continued. He argued the charms as precautionary measures during a period of core instability following Voldemort's curse deflection, partly true, Poppy knew, for the first 2 or 3. He argued that the self-worth modifier was intended to produce healthy humility rather than damage, which was either self-deception or an outright lie, and she suspected he no longer knew the difference. He argued the loyalty compulsion as protection against manipulation by dark forces, which was so precisely backwards that the audacity of it was almost impressive. He did not argue the dependency charm. He didn't mention it. Poppy noted this. He spoke for 25 minutes, and when he finished approximately a third of the chamber had the expression of people who had been reminded of why they trusted him, and 2/3 had the expression of people watching someone make a very sophisticated argument for something that was still, underneath the sophistication, wrong. The floor opened to questions. There were many. Amelia answered some. Hestia answered others. Dumbledore answered several with the patience of a man who was accustomed to explaining himself to people with less information than he had and was prepared to be generous about it. And then Augusta Longbottom, from the neutral block, raised her hand. "I have a question," she said, "not for the healer or for the DMLE representative." She looked at the witness seats. "I'd like to hear from Harry Potter." The chamber shifted. Several members on the left arc, Dumbledore's alliance, stirred with objections. "The child is 5 years old," said one man, Lord Greengrass, in the tone of someone who felt that this settled it. "This chamber doesn't, this chamber," Madam Marchbanks said, with the absolute authority of someone who had been a Wisengamot member since before Lord Greengrass was born, "hears from relevant witnesses. The subject of this session is relevant." She looked at the witness seats. "With Madam Pomfrey's consent as current guardian." Poppy looked at Harry. Harry was already standing up. "He has my consent," Poppy said, which was technically secondary to Harry having his own. He walked to the center floor. He was wearing the simplest clean robes Poppy had been able to find for him. Minerva had transfigured something appropriate, deep blue, his size, which in the context of the enormous stone chamber made him look very small and entirely unintimidated, which was somehow more affecting than if he'd looked appropriately overawed. He stood in the center of the floor and looked up at the tiers of faces looking down at him, and he waited. "Harry," Augusta said. "In your own words. What was it like?" The chamber was very quiet. Harry considered the question seriously, with the characteristic pause he gave everything. Then he began. "I lived in a cupboard," he said. His voice was clear and even and the acoustics carried it perfectly. "Under the stairs. It had a latch on the outside and a lock. The lock was mostly for nights." He said this without inflection, without reaching for sympathy. "I ate when there was extra food. There mostly wasn't. My cousin is very large. I'm small. The difference in size is mostly about the last 4 years." He paused. "I have 3 healed rib fractures. I didn't know what that was until Poppy told me. I just knew it hurt when I breathed for a while and then it stopped hurting." The chamber was breathing carefully. "I didn't know much about magic," he continued. "I knew I was supposed to hide it. I knew it made bad things happen if I didn't. I knew I was supposed to be grateful for having somewhere to live and not to ask for things." He looked up at the tiers, and his green eyes moved across the faces with that calm, systematic attention. "I was told, not out loud but through everything around me, that I was a burden. That I was there on someone else's goodwill. That the best thing I could be was small and quiet and not a problem." He let that sit. "Poppy told me about the charms. About what they were for. The self-worth one, that's the one that made me feel like I didn't matter. Like my life was worth less." He said this with the same flat evenness. "I didn't know it was a charm. I thought that was just true. I thought that was just what I was." He paused. "The loyalty one was meant to make me trust and follow one person no matter what they said. The dependency one was meant to make me feel safe only when that person was near." He looked at Dumbledore. "You." Dumbledore met his gaze. "You wanted me to feel like you were the only safe thing," Harry said, still with that absolute evenness. "So that when you told me it was time to give myself up, I'd do it because I'd trust you. Because you'd made sure I didn't trust myself." He tilted his head slightly. "That's not protection. You weren't protecting me. You were shaping me." A pause. "Into a weapon that would cooperate when it was used." The silence was the loudest thing in the room. "I understand you think that was necessary," Harry said, and this was perhaps the most devastating part, because there was no hatred in his voice, no performance, just a clarity that went all the way through. I understand you think you were saving everyone. I understand the prophecy means something is coming and you decided the best way to handle it was to make me into something that would die for it without question. He looked around the chamber. But the thing is, I would have, anyway. I would have faced whatever needs to be faced. My mum didn't have a charm on her when she stood in front of me. She did it because she loved me and because she chose to. That's why it worked. He looked at Dumbledore. You didn't trust me to choose. So you took the choice away. He stopped. The chamber was so quiet you could hear the torches. I want to be a wizard, Harry said, simply, finally. A real one, not one that was made the way you made me. I want to learn and I want to choose and I want my magic to be mine. He looked at the tears. I'm asking you to make sure that's allowed to happen. He walked back to his seat. Poppy put her hand over his when he sat down. He was shaking very slightly, not from fear, she thought, but from the specific exhaustion of having held very still while something important happened, and he looked at her and nodded once and breathed. The chamber erupted. Not in the dramatic sense, not shouting or disorder, the Wizengamot was not that kind of body, but in the sudden, urgent crosstalk of a room where many people had many urgent things to say simultaneously. Marchbanks let it run for approximately 20 seconds and then called order with the efficiency of long practice. Dumbledore had not moved. He sat in the Chief Warlock's chair and he looked at Harry across the chamber with an expression that Poppy had never seen on his face before, in 31 years of knowing him. It was not the warm serenity, not the patient wisdom, not the calculated grandfatherly concern. It was genuine reckoning. The expression of a man confronting a mirror. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then it was gone, replaced by something composed and careful and harder to read. The vote took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of formal argument and procedural motion and block consultation, and Poppy sat through all of it with Harry on one side and Sirius on the other, Sirius who was holding himself with the taut specific tension of someone who had learned in Azkaban not to hope for things too hard in case hoping made the disappointment worse. Amelia presented the final motion in 4 parts, formal censure of Dumbledore for unauthorized use of compulsion and suppression charms on a minor, removal from the Chief Warlock position pending full review, immediate full expungement of Sirius Black's record and formal apology of the Ministry for unlawful imprisonment, and designation of Harry Potter as a ward under joint care of Poppy Pomfrey and Sirius Black with a full welfare monitoring order. 4 separate votes. All 4 passed. The first by 18 votes. The second by 11, the narrowest, the Alliance holding best on this one, but not enough. The third unanimously, because there was no version of the truth in which a man spent 4 years in Azkaban without trial and that was acceptable, and when it passed Sirius made a sound that was not quite a word and put his face in his hands. The fourth by 23. Marchbanks read the results with the formal precision of someone who understood that the specific words mattered. And then it was done. Poppy was watching Dumbledore when the final result was read. He sat with his hands folded on his robes and he looked at the center floor, which was empty now, and his face was the face of a man revising something fundamental. Not broken, she didn't think Albus Dumbledore would ever be broken in the conventional sense. But altered. Changed by the weight of something he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what it felt like from the outside. He looked up and met her eyes across the chamber, and for just a moment the grandfatherly architecture was entirely absent, and she saw something unguarded there. Something that might, in another man, have been apology. She looked away. In the anteroom afterward, while the chamber emptied behind them, Sirius sat on a bench and Harry sat beside him and neither of them said anything for about 2 minutes. Then Sirius put his arm around Harry's shoulders and Harry leaned into it slightly, and the two of them sat in the quiet anteroom in the Ministry of Magic while the sounds of the chamber thinned out above them. Remus came in from the observer gallery and sat on the bench across from them, and he looked at Sirius, and Sirius looked at him, and the 4 years of distance and Azkaban and guilt and survival between them seemed to contract into something that could be managed. "Where are you going to live?" Remus asked. "Grim old place," Sirius said, with the enthusiasm of someone contemplating a task they found genuinely awful. My mother's house. It's mine now legally. It'll need everything. He glanced at Harry. We'll make it work. I can help, Remus said. You're staying? Sirius said, and there was something in the question that wasn't quite casual. Yes, Remus said. Simply. I'm staying. Augusta Longbottom appeared in the anteroom doorway, hat perfectly resituated. Well done, she said, to the room at large, which was apparently her version of congratulations. Her eyes went to Harry. You were precise. That was the right instinct. Thank you for asking the question, Harry said. I asked it because it needed to be asked. You gave the answer it needed. She straightened her robes. I'm hosting a gathering of interested parties at Longbottom Manor next week. There are 14 members of the Wisingamot who voted correctly today who will want to meet you in a context that isn't a legal proceeding. Will you come? Harry looked at Sirius. He'll come, Sirius said, which was exactly the right answer, not deciding for Harry, but signaling that Harry had people around him now. Augusta nodded. Good. She looked at Poppy. You did the right thing. I did what any healer should have done, Poppy said. Yes, Augusta said. That's what makes it notable. Most people don't. She left with the click of heeled boots on stone floors, and her presence lingered behind her like the impression of a firmly closed door. Amelia came in last, removing her outer robe and folding it with the precision of someone finally standing down from something she'd held very rigid. She looked at the group assembled on the benches. Pettigrew is in custody, she said. He'll be formally charged this week. His confession is sealed in the record. She looked at Sirius. The ministry will issue a formal statement of wrongful imprisonment. There will be compensation, financial, which I know isn't, it's fine, Sirius said. Money I can deal with. I have more of it than I'll ever need anyway. The blacks were good at accumulating things they didn't deserve. Fair enough. Amelia looked at Harry. The welfare order names Pomfrey and Black jointly. The monitoring is quarterly for the first year, then annual. You can contest any aspect of it at any time. She paused. And Hestia Jones has been authorized to complete the charm removal. She estimates 2 more sessions. When can we start? Harry asked. Amelia almost smiled. Almost. She's available Monday. Monday, Harry said, with the satisfaction of someone checking something off a list. The ministry building around them had the particular quality of a place that has had a significant thing happen in it and was still deciding what it meant. Poppy could hear voices in corridors, the chamber members dispersing, the observers from the gallery making their way out, the whole creaking machinery of institutional response already beginning to process what the day had produced. She thought about the first motion. Censured but not stripped of his other positions, Headmaster of Hogwarts, Supreme Mugwump, those hadn't been on the table today, too large, too entangled. Dumbledore had lost the Chief Warlock chair and his clean record and something much harder to quantify. But he was still Dumbledore. He was still powerful and connected and more experienced than anyone in the chamber with the exception possibly of Marchbanks, and he was a man who played long games. He'll make another move, she said, to Amelia. I know, Amelia said. The censure doesn't bind him. It changes the political landscape but it doesn't remove his ability to act. I know that too. Amelia looked at her with the monocle and the short gray hair and 30 years of doing hard things that needed doing. We stay alert. We keep the monitoring. We build the network. She glanced at Harry. And we trust that the person most worth protecting is also, as it turns out, reasonably capable of protecting himself. Harry had gotten up from the bench and gone to look at the tapestry on the anteroom wall, an old one, showing the founding of the Wisingamot in the 9th century, all those ancient faces around that same horseshoe arrangement, and he was tracing one of the carved border figures with his finger, absorbed and curious. He looked over his shoulder and found Poppy watching him. "Did we win?" he asked. "Today's part," she said. "Yes." He turned back to the tapestry. "Good," he said. "I want to know what happens next." Sirius stood up from the bench, stretching with the careful attention of someone rediscovering what a full range of motion felt like. He crossed to stand beside Harry and looked at the tapestry. "9th century," he said. "The Blacks have 4 representatives in that thing. All of them deeply unpleasant people who thought they were very important." He looked sideways at Harry. "I've been thinking about Grimmauld Place." "Is it terrible?" Harry asked. "Comprehensively. My mother was a deeply committed decorator with extremely specific views about dark magical heritage and the color black." He paused. "We'd have to redo everything. The whole house." Harry considered this. "We could do the library first." Sirius blinked. "The library? If we're going to be there and I need to learn things, we should do the library first." Harry looked up at him with those clear green eyes. "What does it have? What kind of books?" "Mostly dark magic theory, blood supremacy texts, a complete collection of the Malfoy family's published writings which are as dreadful as you'd expect, and I believe a cookery book that was cursed sometime in the 1890s. He paused. "And the Black Grimoire. Which is old." "How old?" 12 generations. Maybe more." Harry turned this over. "We should keep that one," he said. Sirius stared at him. "Not for the dark magic parts," Harry said patiently. "For the magic theory. Old magic theory is different from modern magic theory. Different conceptual frameworks, different assumptions about what magic is and how it works. If I'm going to learn everything I should start from the beginning." He looked at the tapestry again. "Real beginning. Not the version that was written after people had already decided what magic was supposed to be." Sirius turned to look at Remus, who was standing in the doorway watching this exchange with an expression of profound and somewhat overwhelmed recognition. "He sounds like Lily," Remus said. "And James," Sirius said. "The bit where he wants all the information immediately sounds exactly like James." Harry looked between them. "You can tell me about them," he said. "Both of them." "Everything." Not plaintive, it wasn't a plea. It was the same declarative certainty he applied to everything. "I want to know who they were. Not the story. The actual people." The anteroom was quiet. Outside the ministry was going about its business, the session concluded, the votes recorded, the world adjusted by a small but significant increment. Somewhere in the building Dumbledore was having his own conversations about what came next, and Pettigrew was in a holding cell, and the machinery of consequence was turning. But in here it was quiet, and Remus sat back down on the bench, and Sirius sat beside Harry, and Poppy sat on the end and watched the 3 of them, and Remus began, "Your father's name was James, and the first thing you should know about him is that he was an absolute menace on a broomstick." Harry smiled. It was the first time Poppy had seen him smile with everything, without reserve, without the careful management of something that might be taken away. Just a smile. Full and unguarded and exactly his. She looked away before anyone could see her expression, and she thought, There he is. There's the boy he was always supposed to be." Chapter 5. What remains Grimmauld Place had not been lived in since Walburga Black decided that the best protest against her son's disgraceful choices was to die loudly in the portrait in the entrance hall and make everyone else deal with it. The house was a townhouse in a terrace of identical townhouses in a square that Muggle eyes slid off of, number 12 existing in their peripheral vision as a persistent architectural impossibility that their brains quietly declined to process. Inside it was large and dark and deeply committed to its own awfulness, dark wood paneling, carpets the color of old wounds, the mounted heads of house elves along the hallway wall in a display that managed to be both decorative and a statement of political philosophy. Sirius had opened the front door on their first visit, taken one look at the hallway, and said, "I need a week and several large fires," with the weary certainty of a man who had been dreading this exact moment. Harry had walked past him into the house. He went through every room methodically, which Sirius observed with a look somewhere between alarm and fascination. He opened doors and looked inside and closed them again, not touching anything yet, just cataloguing. The drawing room with its tapestry of the Black family tree, names burned off where Sirius's had been blasted. The kitchen, which was actually large and functional underneath the grime. The library. He spent 20 minutes in the library. It ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls, deep shelves with a rolling ladder on brass runners, and the books were dense and old and smelled of a specific combination of knowledge and time and magical saturation that Harry apparently found compelling, because he went to the nearest shelf and ran one finger along the spines without touching the books themselves, reading titles, his lips moving slightly. Sirius stood in the doorway watching him. "The dark magic texts are on the top shelves," Sirius said. "Left wall. I can remove them if—" "Don't," Harry said, still reading spines. "I want to know what they say. I want to know what it is." He glanced back. "Knowing what something is doesn't mean agreeing with it. You sound like a 40-year-old professor. You sound like someone who's afraid of his own library." Sirius opened his mouth, closed it, and decided that arguing with a 5-year-old about magical epistemology was not a battle he had the current energy for. That had been 3 weeks ago. Now, on a morning in late October with the first frost making patterns on the kitchen windows, Grimmauld Place was different enough from its former self that the difference was architectural. Most of the mounted heads were gone. Creature, the ancient house elf who had emerged from the depths of the house on their second day with the specific hostility of someone who resented being disturbed and the complicated allegiance of someone who didn't entirely know who to be loyal to anymore, had removed them at Harry's request. Not Sirius's. Harry had asked, and asked with the polite directness that he applied to everyone regardless of their status or opinions about him, and Creature had looked at him for a long, assessing moment and then done it. Sirius had watched the exchange with visible bewilderment. "He hates everyone," Sirius had said afterward, quietly, while Creature was elsewhere. "He hates being ignored," Harry had said. "He's been alone here for 4 years. He needed someone to talk to him like he mattered." He'd paused. "I know what that's like." Sirius had not had a good answer for that. The kitchen table was the center of things now. Poppy came 3 times a week for charm removal sessions, which were down to the last 8, the deepest and oldest and most integrated, the ones woven into the earliest layer of Harry's core development, and Hestia was meticulous and careful and slow, and each removal now produced a quality of expansion that Harry described as increasingly difficult to ignore. "It's like someone keeps making the room bigger," he told Poppy one morning, sitting at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea he made himself, competently, because he'd watched Sirius make it wrong twice and decided to learn the correct method. "I keep expecting to reach a wall and instead there's just more space. Is it uncomfortable?" Poppy asked. He thought about it honestly. "Not uncomfortable. Loud, sometimes. I can feel things." He glanced toward the window. "The ward on the street. There's a detection charm on the front gate that's been there for about 40 years, I think. It has that old, settled feeling. And Creature's magic, when he moves around the house. Everyone has a different texture." He looked at her. "Is that normal? At your level of magical sensitivity, after this degree of suppression removal?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "It might become normal. It might settle. Your perceptual range is," she searched for the right description, "wider than most adult wizards' experience. What you're feeling may be baseline for what your core actually is." He considered this with the pragmatic equanimity he brought to every new piece of information about himself. "Okay," he said. "Then, Remus is outside. He's been there for 10 minutes. He's working himself up to coming in." Poppy looked at the kitchen door. 5 seconds later it opened and Remus came in, slightly frost-damp from the garden, with a worn leather satchel and the look of someone who had indeed been working themselves up to something. "I have the books," he said, setting the satchel on the table. Harry's attention sharpened immediately. The full quality of it, the absolute focus of someone whose intellectual capacity had been progressively unshackled over the last month, was something that Poppy was still adjusting to. When Harry was interested in something, the air in the room seemed to reorganize itself around that interest. "All of them," he said. "All the ones I could find. Basic theory, charms foundations, early arithmancy." Remus sat down and began pulling books from the bag. "And this one, which is technically a third-year text, but the first 3 chapters are foundational and you'll need them before the theory makes sense." Harry pulled the nearest book across the table and opened it. Remus watched him read for a moment. "You could just, let me go through it with you. That's why I'm here." "I know." Harry didn't look up. "I'm checking how it's structured first. Then I'll have better questions." He turned a page. "Give me 2 minutes." Remus looked at Poppy. Poppy looked at Remus. Neither of them said anything, because there was nothing particularly useful to say. 2 minutes later Harry looked up and said, "The section on elemental affinity is in Chapter 6 but the foundation for it is in Chapter 2. You need to read them together or Chapter 6 doesn't make sense. Whoever structured this book organized it wrong." Remus blinked. "That's, actually a complaint I've had about that textbook for 20 years. "Then we'll read Chapters 2 and 6 together first," Harry said, "and then go back to Chapter 1. The informal education had started this way, 3 weeks ago, organically rather than by design. Remus had always been a teacher by instinct. It was the affliction that had prevented him from pursuing it formally, and the relief he felt at having a student who not only wanted to learn but seemed to process information at a rate that kept him genuinely engaged was visible enough that Sirius commented on it within the first week. "You look like yourself again," Sirius had said, and Remus had said, "Don't," and Sirius had said, "I'm going to keep saying it until it stops being true," and the two of them had the particular argument of people who had known each other long enough that the argument itself was a form of affection. The other new presence at the table was Susan Bones. She'd appeared one Thursday when Amelia brought the quarterly monitoring report, a girl exactly Harry's age with strawberry blonde plaits and the directness of a child raised by Amelia Bones, which was to say that she had absolutely no patience for being spoken to as though she were decorative. She had looked at Harry across the kitchen table and said, "Auntie Amelia says you're the boy from the Wisengamot thing." "Probably," Harry had said. "She says you're very clever. Amelia's hard to impress." "I'll take it." Susan had sat down, uninvited, and helped herself to one of Creature's biscuits, and that had been that. She came twice a week now. She and Harry had a friendship that operated on a frequency of mutual directness that somehow bypassed the usual getting-to-know-you awkwardness entirely. They argued about everything with the engaged energy of people who were actually listening to each other, which was different from fighting, and occasionally one of them changed their position based on the argument, which was different from both. This morning she was perched on the kitchen counter eating toast while Harry and Remus worked through Chapters 2 and 6 simultaneously, her feet swinging, watching the session with the evaluating look that Poppy recognized as family trait. "You skipped the bit about wand with theory," she said. "It's not relevant until Chapter 4, Harry said, without looking up. "It's relevant to the elemental affinity section. Holly has a fire affinity. It's mentioned as a footnote in Chapter 4 but it affects the casting variance in." Harry stopped. He looked at her. Then he flipped back 3 pages and read something. "You're right," he said, which he said without difficulty, the way someone said it when they'd evaluated the evidence and concluded it, rather than the way someone said it as a social performance. "Add Hollywood to the casting variance examples." Remus looked between them. "How do you know about wand with theory?" he said to Susan. "I read the wand lore section of Grand's copy of The Art of the Wand Maker over the summer. It was on the coffee table and I was bored." She took another bite of toast. "Harry, what's your wand wood?" "Don't have a wand yet," Harry said. "You're doing wandless magic right now," she pointed out, gesturing to the kettle, which had filled itself and was hovering precisely 2 inches above the stovetop. heating without contact in a way that Remus had quietly stopped commenting on after the first week. "That's different," Harry said. "How?" "I don't know yet. That's why I need to understand the theory first." Susan considered this. "That's actually a good reason." "Thank you," Harry said, with the serene certainty of someone who wasn't actually seeking her validation but didn't mind having it. The kettle finished. It set itself down precisely. Poppy left them to it and found Sirius in the drawing room, which was the room he'd been working on this week. The black family tapestry still dominated one wall. Sirius was apparently approaching it with the ambivalence of something that was both repellent and, in its own ugly way, historical, and hadn't decided yet, but the rest of the room had been stripped of its former personality and was in the process of becoming something else. Lighter paint where he'd been experimenting. Two of the windows had had their heavy curtains removed and the morning light coming in was making the whole room look surprised at itself. Sirius was standing in front of the tapestry with his arms crossed. "Problem?" Poppy said. "I keep waiting to feel something about this," he said. "For years I thought about ripping it off the wall. Now I'm standing in front of it and he shrugged. "I don't know. It's old. It's genuinely old. And terrible, obviously. My mother's face is on it." He moved his eyes along the embroidered branches. "Harry's parents are on here. Did you know that? James Potter married in. They burned off his name but the thread's still there. You can see where it was." Poppy came to stand beside him and looked. Yes, there was a gap in the branches, a darker patch where threads had been deliberately scorched, and beside it Lily's name, and above them both the small embroidered mark that indicated. She looked more closely. A child's name. Harry James Potter. Still there. The family had apparently not gotten around to burning it off before Walburga died. "He's on the tapestry," she said. "Yeah," Sirius said. "He is." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep doing that. Finding things that are, he should have had all of this. Not the terrible parts, but the belonging. The history. The people. James should be alive and Harry should have had all of this from the beginning and instead," he stopped. "Instead I was in Azkaban and he was in a cupboard and Remus was alone and everything that should have been, Sirius." He stopped. "He has it now," she said. "Not the way he should have had it, but he has it. You're here, Remus is here, the house is here. He has what's left of it." She paused. "That's what you can give him. Not what was lost. What remains." Sirius looked at the tapestry for another moment. Then he dropped his arms from their crossed position and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "He asked me last night," Sirius said. "About the Marauders map." "The what?" It's something James and I and Remus and Peter made, when we were at school. A map of Hogwarts that shows every corridor and every room and every person in it." He paused on Peter's name in a particular way. "Harry asked me last night if it still existed." "Does it?" "I have no idea. It's either still at Hogwarts or it got confiscated and destroyed and I genuinely don't know which." He looked at her sideways. "He wants to go to Hogwarts. He's 5. I know he's 5. He knows he's 5. He wants to go to Hogwarts anyway." Sirius's mouth curved. "I told him he couldn't start until he was 11 and he looked at me like I'd suggested something mildly interesting to consider and I've been waiting for the counter-argument ever since." Poppy thought about this. She'd been thinking about it for some time, actually, the question of Harry's education, of what 5 years with the Dursleys and 67 charms had done to his formal learning alongside his informal development, and what the right framework for addressing it was. Remus was excellent and devoted but he was one person, and Harry was something she didn't have a clean educational framework for, was the honest answer. "Augusta Longbottom has been in contact," she said. "She has a tutor in mind. Someone who worked with exceptional magical cases before retirement." "Who?" Bathsheba babbling. She's the ancient runes professor at Hogwarts in absentia. She took a sabbatical 3 years ago that has apparently extended indefinitely. Augusta says she taught privately for a decade before that and that her students included 3 of the most technically accomplished witches and wizards of the last generation. Sirius looked at her. Does Harry know about this? Not yet. He's going to have opinions. Yes, Poppy agreed. That's why I wanted to talk to you first. Sirius nodded slowly. He'd want to meet her before he agreed. He wouldn't let us just install a tutor without, I know. Poppy looked at the tapestry. At Harry's name, small and embroidered and stubbornly still there. I'll let him know she's a possibility and let him make the call. He'll make you arrange a meeting, Sirius said. I expect so. And she's going to meet a 5-year-old who has read 3 magical theory primers, a 3rd-year charms text, and apparently the entire first shelf of this library's non-dark magic section, and she's going to either be delighted or terrified. Possibly both, Poppy said, which was the 2nd time in recent memory she'd used Augusta Longbottom's exact phrasing, and she decided it was simply the most accurate description of the probable outcomes. The last 8 charms came off on a Tuesday. Hestia came at 9 in the morning and stayed until 4 in the afternoon, and it was the most complex session yet, the bottom layer, the oldest charms, the ones woven so deeply into Harry's core that in some places the charm structure and his natural magical development had grown together like 2 different plants that had been in the same soil so long they'd twined around each other. She worked in 2-hour blocks with breaks in between, and Harry sat in the kitchen. The kitchen had become the default location for everything, Poppy had noticed, as if the house itself had decided that the kitchen was its true center and was gradually relocating all meaningful activity there, and during the breaks he was quiet in a particular way, the way someone was quiet when they were paying very close attention to something internal. Sirius brought food during the 2nd break and sat across from Harry and didn't ask how he was feeling, which was exactly right, because Harry would say when there was something to say. After the 3rd session Harry looked at his hands for a long time. Last one, Hestia said, from across the table. The room was very still. Hestia cast the final removal, and there was a sound, not a loud one, not the dramatic resonance of something in a story, but a very clear, small sound, the specific sound of something finally, completely letting go, and then Harry breathed out. The lights in the kitchen went fully brilliant for approximately 3 seconds, every candle flame tripling, and then they settled back to normal except they were warmer than they'd been before, the light having a slightly different quality, as if the source had changed. The frost on the kitchen windows melted. Not dramatically, a slow, quiet disappearance. Harry put both hands flat on the kitchen table and looked at them. How do you feel? Hestia asked. He thought about it for a long time, long enough that Sirius started to say something and Remus put his hand on Sirius's arm and stopped him. Large, Harry said finally. Like the room got much bigger and I'm much bigger in it. He paused. And, he looked up. His eyes were very bright. Angry. Still. But cleaner. Like it was always there and now there's nothing in the way of it. The anger is yours, Hestia said. It was yours before, covered over. You're allowed to have it. I know, Harry said, without any particular emphasis, in the tone of someone who had decided this before being given permission and simply found the permission redundant. He sat with it for another moment. Then he said, I want to go outside. They went to the small walled garden behind the house, which Remus had spent 2 weeks clearing because he found gardening meditative and the garden had been in a state of aggressive magical overgrowth, various black family-planted specimens having decided in the absence of a human authority figure to simply become whatever they felt like. It was tidy now, November bare, the London sky its flat grey above the walls. Harry walked to the middle of the garden and stood there. He did nothing, for a moment. Just stood and breathed. Then he raised one hand, without particular drama, and every dead rosebush along the south wall put out a small cluster of green leaves. He looked at them. Then he let the hand drop, and the leaves remained, small and vivid and out of season in the grey November garden. Sirius made a sound that was not quite a word. Remus sat down on the garden step. "Okay," Harry said. He turned to face them, and he looked exactly like himself, exactly, wholly, entirely himself, no suppression and no modification and nothing in the way, and he looked at Sirius and said, "I want to start learning properly now." "We've been, properly," Harry said. "Theory first, then practical. All of it. History, magical theory, arithmancy, charms, transfiguration, herbology, all of it. I want the whole structure. Not just the interesting parts." He looked at Remus. "You're the best teacher I have, but you know you're not a charm specialist." "Devastatingly accurate," Remus said. "And I want someone who knows ancient magic. Old magic theory, pre-standardization." He looked between them. "Poppy said Augusta Longbottom has someone. I want to meet her." "I'll arrange it," Poppy said. "And I want to go to Hogwarts." "Harry, not to study there. Just," he looked up, in the direction of Scotland, which was not visible but which he seemed to be orienting toward regardless. "I want to walk around it. The castle knows me. I could feel it the 3 days I was there. I want to see it properly." He paused. "Is that allowed?" Sirius and Poppy exchanged a look. "I'll speak to Minerva," Poppy said. He nodded. Then he looked at the rosebushes with their out-of-season leaves, and something settled in his face, not satisfaction exactly, but a quality of arrival, the feeling of being somewhere you were supposed to be after a long time of not being there. Bathsheba Babbling arrived 3 days later. She was a small, energetic woman in her late 60s with ink-stained fingers and the slightly wild appearance of someone who spent most of their time in archives. She came through the door and immediately began looking at the bookshelves, which was apparently her version of making an entrance, and she pulled out the black family grimoire, the one Harry had asked Sirius to keep, and began turning pages, murmuring to herself. "Interesting marginalia," she said. 12th century notation on the binding charms. Whoever annotated this new pre-Norman magical theory?" She looked up and registered Harry standing across the room. "You're the boy." "Yes," Harry said. "You've read the first shelf. And the second. The third is mostly genealogy texts which I haven't finished." She looked at him with the assessing alertness of someone whose professional instincts had just been activated. "What did you make of the magical theory in Volume 7 of the Family Records? The section on intent versus instruction?" "It's incomplete," Harry said immediately. "The argument about intent being primary falls apart in Chapter 3 because the author hadn't resolved the cases where intent and instruction diverge in complex casting. He just stopped addressing it and moved on." Babbling stared at him. "The theory needs a third term," Harry said. "Intent, instruction, and, I don't have the right word for it yet. The quality that decides which one wins when they're in conflict. The resolution mechanism." Babbling sat down. She was already reaching for a notebook. "Do you know," she said, with the tone of someone who has just been handed something interesting, "that the pre-standardization magical texts have a word for exactly that mechanism? Lain dormant in the literature for about 600 years because the standardization movement considered it philosophically inconvenient." "What's the word?" Harry said. "Sit down," Babbling said. "This will take a while." Harry sat down. His face had the quality of a compass finding north. Remus, from the doorway, looked at Sirius. Sirius looked at Remus. Something passed between them that was equal parts relief and something else. "We've lost him to academia," Sirius said. "We lost him to academia 3 weeks ago," Remus said. "We just didn't know what to call it." The 4 weeks that followed had the productive quality of something that has found its correct shape. Babbling came 4 days a week and worked with Harry for 3 hours at a stretch, and she was the first person in his life, the first formal teacher, who never modified her material down because of his age, who simply started where he was and went forward from there, and who was visibly enjoying herself in a way that suggested she'd forgotten teaching could be this. Remus covered history and transfiguration theory and, increasingly, practical magic work, because Harry's wandless casting was now at a level that a 12-year-old would have been proud of, and they both knew a wand would multiply it, and neither of them was fully prepared for what multiplied looked like. "We should go to Ollivander's," Remus said, one evening, to Sirius. "I know," Sirius said. "He needs a wand." "I know," Sirius said again. "You're nervous about it." "I'm not nervous, yes, fine, I'm nervous." Sirius was on the floor of the drawing room with a piece of sandpaper and the wainscoting, which was his current project. He stopped sanding. His mother walked into Ollivander's at 11 and walked out with a wand, and Ollivander made a sound like she'd passed some kind of test. His father walked in at 11 and Ollivander said he'd never felt a core like it. He looked at the sandpaper. "Harry is 5. His core right now is already." "I know," Remus said. "What is Ollivander going to say?" Remus thought about it. "I don't know. Something memorable, probably. The man is very dramatic about wands." "What if Harry's magic?" Sirius stopped. "What if it's beyond what a wand can handle?" "I don't know if that's even possible." "It might not be a concern," Remus said. "A wand doesn't limit the magic. It directs it. That's its function. A wider river doesn't need a smaller channel, it needs a proportional one." Sirius absorbed this. "Did you just make an architectural metaphor about Harry's magical core?" "I was going for hydraulics, but yes." Sirius laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that still had surprise in it, the laugh of someone who hadn't laughed properly for a long time and was still occasionally caught off guard by the fact that they could. He looked at Remus across the room, and Remus looked back, and the drawing room was warm and the house was theirs, and the boy was down the hall asking Creature a question about magical botany with a directness that had apparently completely transformed Creature's opinion of the family's blood inheritance. "Saturday," Sirius said. "We'll go Saturday." "He'll need to know the shop might respond to him," Remus said. "The wand cases, the old ones in the back. They're sensitized to magical presence. If his magic is, I'll tell him," Sirius said. "He'll want to know." He told Harry that evening, simply and directly, and Harry received the information in the way he received everything, with interest and without apprehension. "So the shop might react," Harry said. "Might. Possibly. How does Ollivander react to people whose magic is unusual?" "With great enthusiasm and somewhat alarming focus," Sirius said. "Good," Harry said. "I can work with that." But Saturday came with something else first. Poppy arrived on Saturday morning with Amelia Bones, unannounced, and the specific combination of their expressions told Sirius before either of them spoke that this was not a routine visit. "What happened?" Sirius said. "Dumbledore has petitioned the Wizengamot," Amelia said. She sat at the kitchen table, which meant it was a sitting-down kind of news. "He's not challenging the censure. He's done something more targeted." She set a folded document on the table. "He's filed a formal petition requesting oversight of Harry's education until Hogwarts age. Citing the prophecy. Arguing that without structured preparation aligned with what the prophecy requires, Harry remains at risk." The kitchen was quiet. Sirius read the document. Then he pushed it across to Harry, which was what Harry had been waiting for. Harry read it. His expression did not change in any dramatic way while he read. He read with the same focused attention he brought to every text, and when he finished he set it down and looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Amelia. "He can't win this," he said. "He's already censured. The Wizengamot already ruled on the welfare order." "Correct. This petition has a low probability of success. But filing it does things," Harry said. "It puts the prophecy officially in the record. It forces the question of what the prophecy says into a formal context where it has to be addressed." He paused. "And it tells us something." "What?" Sirius said. "He's impatient," Harry said. "He's been playing a long game for years. He was patient enough to wait while I was in that cupboard, patient enough to build 67 charms over 4 years. But this, he looked at the document. This is fast. This is reactive. He looked at Amelia. Something has changed. Something is moving. Something made him feel like he didn't have time to wait. Amelia looked at him for a moment. That assessment is consistent with other intelligence the DMLE has received, she said carefully. Voldemort, Harry said. The word fell into the kitchen the way it always fell, with its particular weight, the weight of a word that had been trained out of an entire generation of people. Amelia didn't flinch. There are indications, she said, that something is reconstituting. At a distance. Nothing concrete yet. Harry was quiet for a moment. The prophecy is about me and Voldemort, he said. Not a question. Yes, Amelia said, and you could see her deciding that he was owed the truth, as she always decided when she evaluated him. I have not read the full text. But the portion that's been disclosed in Dumbledore's filing, she tapped the document. He included it. I think he thought it would strengthen his case. She looked at Harry steadily. It says one must destroy the other. That a power exists which Voldemort doesn't know. She paused. It says neither can live while the other survives. The kitchen. Harry's face. Something moved through it that was complicated and deep and very briefly visible, the specific look of a person receiving news that changes the landscape of their future and deciding, in real time, what to do with it. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Then it was gone. Okay, Harry said. Sirius made a sound. Harry, I said okay, Harry said. Not dismissive. Clear. I'm not going to pretend it's fine, because it isn't. It's terrible. But it's also, he picked up the document and looked at it. It's mine. It's my situation. My life. And I would rather know about it and make my own choices about it than not know and be maneuvered. He put the document down. Dumbledore had this information for 4 years and he used it to decide for me. He decided I should be a willing sacrifice. I'm not going to let anyone decide for me again. Sirius was looking at him with the complicated anguish of someone who loved a person he could not protect from something, and knew it, and was trying to find the right shape for that feeling. What do you want to do? Sirius said. Right now. What do you want? Harry thought about it for a genuine moment. I want to go to Ollivander's, he said. Like we planned. And then I want to come home and figure out what comes next. He paused. And I want Remus here for it. All of it. He looked at Sirius. And I want you to stop looking at me like I just told you I was dying. I didn't. I told you there's something to figure out. Those are different things. Sirius stared at him. We should go, Harry said, pushing back his chair. Ollivander's opens at 9. The shop was everything the story suggested, narrow and dusty and towering, the shelves of wand boxes going back and up into a dimness that suggested the shelves had been added as needed over centuries without anyone being particularly concerned about planning permission. It smelled of wood shavings and something older, something that registered not quite through the nose but in the back of the jaw, the way ozone did before lightning. Ollivander emerged from the back with the inevitability of someone who had been expecting them. He was a slight man with colorless eyes that gave the impression of looking past the surface of things, and he stopped when he saw Harry and tilted his head with the particular attention of a craftsman encountering a material he wants to assess. Harry Potter, he said. I was wondering when. Were you expecting me? Harry said. I've been expecting many things. You were among them. He looked at him with those pale eyes. I knew your parents. Your mother had a supple vine wand, 10¼ inches, dragon heartstring, excellent for charm work. Your father, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, Harry said. Excellent for transfiguration. Ollivander blinked. You've done some research. Some. Well then. The wand maker moved between the shelves with the economical movement of someone navigating a familiar space. Shall we see what wants you? He paused. I say, wants, deliberately. In my experience, at your level of magical development, the choosing will be more than usually specific. He began the process. A tape measure took Harry's dimensions with the automatic efficiency of long enchantment. Ollivander brought 3 wands in quick succession, tried them, watched Harry's face, watched the air around Harry's hand, and each time the wand produced a polite nothing, the magical equivalent of a handshake with a stranger. The 4th produced a shower of gold sparks that also set a small stack of boxes on fire, which Ollivander extinguished without looking up. Closer, he said, and his voice had sharpened with interest. He went deeper into the shop. He came back with something that wasn't in a box, a wand loose in his hand, presented on his palm, and Poppy, who was standing near the door and had been watching with her healer's attention engaged, felt something change in the quality of the air before Harry had even touched it. 11 inches, Ollivander said quietly. Holly and phoenix feather. Very powerful. He held it out. The same core as the wand that gave you that scar. Curious, isn't it? Harry looked at the wand on Ollivander's palm. He reached out and picked it up. The shop exploded with light. Not destructively, not the fire and chaos of an incompatible wand making a protest. This was something else, every wand box on every shelf pulsing with a warm amber radiance simultaneously, the whole shop lit from within like a room full of lanterns, and a wind from nowhere that lifted dust from the shelves and turned it briefly to something like gold before it fell again. Ollivander stood in the middle of this with his pale eyes wide and an expression that was professionally calibrated and yet not quite managing to contain everything happening behind it. The light settled. The wind died. The boxes went back to their ordinary wood and cardboard. Harry was standing with the wand in his hand, and his eyes were very bright, and Poppy could feel his magic from across the room the way you felt the warmth from an open fire, present and certain and alive. Yes, Ollivander said softly. I'd say that's the one. What was the light? Harry asked. Every wand in this shop recognizes a magical core of sufficient magnitude, Ollivander said. In the same way that a tuning fork resonates to the right frequency. He looked at Harry with those colorless eyes. In my shop, in my career, I have seen that response twice. Once from your mother. Once from a wizard whose name I will not say. He paused. I will say that your mother's response was warm, and his was cold. What you just produced was, he considered. Neither cold nor merely warm. What was it? Harry asked. Ollivander looked at him. Old, he said, simply. Very old. Like the light that was here before we built things to hold it. Harry turned the wand in his fingers. Tried a small motion, something instinctive rather than trained, and a clear note rang out from the wand tip, actual sound, brief and clear as struck glass. Sirius, in the corner, had both hands over his mouth. Remus had gone very still with the look of someone revising everything they thought they knew about what was coming. We'll take it, Poppy said, because someone needed to be practical. They walked back to Grimmauld Place through the Diagon Alley morning, Harry with the wand in his inside pocket and his hands in the pockets of his robes, and Sirius walked beside him and said nothing for a while, which was its own kind of presence, and then said, Your mom would have had a lot of thoughts about what just happened in there. Good thoughts or alarm thoughts? Harry said. Honestly? Probably both, in rapid succession, and then she'd have started planning your entire curriculum for the next 12 years. Harry considered this. Good, he said. Then I'm doing it right. Sirius laughed. That surprised, real laugh. He pulled Harry briefly under one arm as they walked and Harry let him, and they walked the rest of the way home through the November morning, and the wand was warm in Harry's pocket, and the world was very large and very complicated and entirely, completely, his. Chapter 6, The Shape of the Future. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning in December, 3 weeks after Ollivander's. No owl. No ministry memo. Just a piece of parchment that appeared on the kitchen table between one moment and the next, folded once, sealed with plain wax. No mark on the seal. Just Harry's name on the front in that familiar looping hand. Harry was the one who found it. He'd come downstairs before anyone else, which he did most mornings now. The early hours were his, a habit from years of lying awake in a cupboard listening to the house, converted into something purposeful. He made tea. He read. He thought. Creature appeared at some point with toast without being asked, which was its own kind of communication. He saw the letter and looked at it for a moment without touching it. Then he picked it up, broke the seal, and read it. Harry, I have imposed on your household enough through official channels to understand that you will not welcome an uninvited visit, so I am writing first. I am asking, plainly, for an hour of your time. I will come wherever you choose, at whatever hour suits you, with no one else present if that is your preference. I have things to tell you that you deserve to hear from me directly. Not in a courtroom, not through intermediaries. Some of what I must say concerns your parents. Some concerns the prophecy. Some concerns a matter I have told no one, which I believe you need to know. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not asking you to change your opinion of me. I am asking only for the chance to be honest with you in a way I was not honest before. You may refuse. I will not impose. Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in his pocket, and finished his tea. He told Sirius at breakfast, which he did by putting the letter on the table beside Sirius's plate without comment and watching Sirius read it and watching the sequence of expressions that produced. Sirius set the letter down. He looked at Harry. No, he said. I haven't asked you anything yet. You were about to ask if you could meet with him. I was going to tell you I was going to meet with him, Harry said. Not ask. Sirius opened his mouth. He has information about my parents, Harry said. He has the full text of the prophecy. He has something he says he's told no one. He looked at Sirius across the table with the patient, clear look that was not stubborn in the childish sense but simply certain. I need that information. He's the only one who has all of it. And he's right that I deserve to hear it from him directly. He had 67 charms on I know what he did. He put you in a cupboard. I know that too. Harry, I'm not going because I've forgiven him, Harry said. I'm going because information is more useful than the satisfaction of refusing. He paused. I'm also going because I want to look at him directly and tell him things, and I want him to have to hear them. And I can't do that if I don't go. Remus, across the table, had been quiet. He looked at Sirius now with an expression that said several things, the main one being that Harry was not wrong and Sirius knew it. Sirius pushed back from the table. He stood up. He went to the window and looked at the grey December street and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to be in the house. In the next room. The whole time. Yes, Harry said. And Remus. Yes. And Poppy. Harry considered. Yes. If she wants to be. He paused. But he comes alone. I want him alone. Sirius turned from the window. If he does anything, he won't, Harry said. And the certainty in his voice was not bravado. It was simply the assessment of someone who had looked at the situation clearly and calculated the variables. The reply went the same way the letter came. It appeared on the kitchen table 20 minutes after Harry wrote it, which told him something about the method of delivery. He'd written, tomorrow. 10 in the morning. Number 12, Grimmauld Place. Alone. He had not written please. Dumbledore came at 10 exactly. Sirius let him in, which cost something. Poppy could see it cost something, could see Sirius holding himself with the deliberate stillness of a person overriding every instinct they had, and brought him to the kitchen, where Harry was sitting at the table with a cup of tea and the grimoire open in front of him, a page of pre-Norman binding theory that he'd been working through with babbling the previous day. He closed the grimoire when Dumbledore came in. He did not stand up. Dumbledore looked around the kitchen with the observational attention of someone reading a place, and his eyes went to the grimoire and the tea and the settled, occupying way Harry sat in the chair, and something moved in his face that was too quick to catch entirely. Then he sat across from Harry, and Sirius left the room, and the door was almost but not quite closed, and it was the two of them. Dumbledore looked older than he had at the Wisengamot session. Not dramatically, not the movie version of an old man aging under pressure, just the subtle adjustment of someone carrying something heavy enough that it was beginning to show. He had the half-moon glasses and the silver beard and the still extraordinary quality of presence, but the room didn't organize itself around him the way rooms had always organized around him. Or perhaps the kitchen simply didn't, because this was Harry's kitchen, Harry's house, and the house knew it. "Thank you for seeing me," Dumbledore said. "I want 3 things from this conversation," Harry said. "The full prophecy text. Everything you know about my parents last night. And the thing you said you've told no one." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "After those 3 things, you can say whatever else you came to say." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Something that might have been the ghost of a rueful smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "You're very like your mother," he said. "People keep saying that," Harry said. "The full prophecy. Please." Dumbledore folded his hands on the table. He looked at them for a moment, and then he looked up and recited it, not from memory, the performance kind, but with the flat precision of someone who had memorized something because they couldn't let themselves forget it. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. Born as the 7th month dies. The Dark Lord shall mark him as his equal. Neither can live while the other survives." Harry listened. His face was still. When Dumbledore finished, Harry was quiet for a moment. "You heard this before I was born," he said. "Yes. And you chose me. Over Neville Longbottom, who was also born at the end of July." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened slightly. "You know about, Augusta Longbottom is forthcoming with people she considers allies," Harry said. "She told me there was another candidate. You chose me because Voldemort chose me. Because he attacked me, he marked me as equal." He paused. "So the prophecy was made, and then Voldemort fulfilled it. He made it real by acting on it. And then you spent 4 years building compliance mechanisms into me because you decided the prophecy meant I had to die." He said this without visible anger, which was somehow more precise than anger would have been. "Did I get that right? It is more complex, did I get it right?" Dumbledore was quiet. "Yes," he said. Quietly. "In its essential shape, yes." "And my parents," Harry said. "That night." Dumbledore closed his eyes for a moment. "James and Lily went into hiding in October of 1981 under the Fidelius charm. The secret keeper was meant to be me." He paused. "James trusted Sirius completely. Sirius suggested they use Peter Pettigrew instead, believing a less obvious choice would be safer." His voice was careful and even. "I believed Sirius was the spy. I was wrong. I should have investigated further. I did not." Harry looked at him. "You thought Sirius was the spy?" "Yes." "Did you tell my father that?" A pause. "No." "Why not?" "I believed," Dumbledore stopped. "I was confident in my assessment and I did not wish to create conflict within the group at a critical time. I managed the situation rather than share my uncertainty." "And they died," Harry said. "Yes." "And Sirius spent 4 years in Azkaban." "Yes." "Because you were confident," Harry said. Dumbledore met his gaze and did not look away. "Yes." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, December rain had started against the windows, a soft, steady sound. "That's the pattern, isn't it?" Harry said. He wasn't asking. He was thinking aloud in that way he sometimes did, when the logic was assembling itself in real time and he wanted to follow it to the end. "You're always confident." You always know the larger picture. And because you know the larger picture, you don't share information, you don't ask permission, you don't check your assumptions. You manage. He looked at Dumbledore. And when you're wrong, other people carry the cost. Dumbledore said nothing. My parents. Serious. Me. Harry picked up his tea, looked at it, set it down. You've been doing this for how long? The managing. The greater good. He looked at Dumbledore. Grindelwald. Something shifted in Dumbledore's face. Something old and very deep. What do you know about Grindelwald? He said. I know you defeated him in 1945. I know you'd known him before that. Augusta Longbottom has some historical texts. Babbling has more. Harry looked at him steadily. You believed in the greater good once. Genuinely. Then something happened that made you stop believing in it and start performing it. He tilted his head. What happened? The rain on the windows. The kitchen warmth. Dumbledore looking at a 5-year-old across a table as if he'd arrived somewhere he hadn't expected to reach. Someone I loved, Dumbledore said, and his voice was at its most unguarded, died because of choices I made when I was certain I was right. He was quiet for a moment. Her name was Ariana. She was my sister. Harry looked at him. And instead of learning that certainty was dangerous, Harry said carefully, you kept the certainty and changed the goal. From changing the world to saving it. He paused. But the method was the same. Decide alone. Act alone. Pay whatever cost is necessary. Except, it's never your cost, is it? It's always someone else's. Dumbledore's jaw was tight. You are asking me to defend choices that, I'm not asking you to defend anything, Harry said. I'm telling you what the pattern is. Because I want you to see it clearly before we get to the thing you said you've told no one. He held Dumbledore's gaze. You told me there was something. You came here to say it. Say it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, Voldemort did not simply survive the killing curse that night. The rain. I know what a Horcrux is, Dumbledore said. A vessel in which a portion of a wizard's soul is anchored, created through an act of deliberate murder. The theory is ancient and terrible and has been rediscovered independently by several dark wizards throughout history. He looked at Harry. I believe Voldemort made more than one. I believe he made several. I have been investigating for years and I have found evidence of at least 4, possibly more. Artifacts and entities through which he preserves a fragment of his soul. He paused. As long as those Horcruxes exist, Voldemort cannot be permanently destroyed. He can be reduced, scattered, forced from a physical form, but not ended. Not truly. Harry was very still. On the night he attacked you, Dumbledore said, his Avada Kedavra rebounded. The force of your mother's protection destroyed his body. But the curse, a curse fueled by a soul already so fractured, cast at a moment of such magical extremity, produced an effect I have never seen documented. He looked at Harry's forehead. At the scar. I believe a fragment of Voldemort's soul was anchored in the impact. In the scar. In you. The kitchen. Harry's face. You believe I'm a Horcrux, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. Inadvertent. Unintentional. Voldemort did not plan it. If he had, he would never have chosen the child he planned to destroy. But the conditions were met, a piece of his soul displaced at the moment of body death, seeking the nearest viable anchor. Which was you. The rain was the only sound for a long moment. That's why you thought I had to die, Harry said. Yes. To destroy that fragment. I believed, Dumbledore stopped. I believed it was the only way. That you would need to walk willingly to your death, allow Voldemort to kill you, destroy the Horcrux within you. And survive, perhaps, through your mother's protection again. But I was not certain you would survive. I was not certain. He said this last part with the specific weight of a man putting something down that he'd been carrying. And I chose not to tell you, or anyone, because I was afraid of what it would change. Afraid you would not accept the role. Because you'd put charms on me to make acceptance more likely, Harry said. Yes. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table. Then he looked up. 2 things, he said. First, the soul fragment. You don't know that removing it kills me. You assumed it. You built a plan around an assumption without testing it. The alternative methods of Horcrux destruction require the vessel to be destroyed, yes. For objects. I'm not an object. Harry's voice was even and precise. I'm a living magical being with a core that has already demonstrated recovery from significant magical trauma. The question of whether a Horcrux fragment can be extracted from a living host rather than requiring the host's destruction is a question nobody has seriously investigated, as far as I can tell, because nobody has encountered this situation before. He looked at Dumbledore. Which means it might be possible. Dumbledore was very still. Second thing, Harry said. Everything you just told me. The Horcruxes you found, the fragment and the scar, the whole architecture of the problem, that's what we need to work on. Together, which means with multiple people, not managed from the top. Amelia Bones. Sirius. Remus. Probably Minerva. He paused. Not secretly. Not as a plan that gets handed down. As an actual shared problem where everyone has the information and everyone contributes. Dumbledore looked at him. Because that's the difference, Harry said. That's how we do this differently from how you were doing it. Information shared, not managed. People trusted, not maneuvered. He held Dumbledore's gaze without blinking. You can help. You know more than anyone else about this and I'm not dismissing that. But you don't get to be the architect anymore. You don't get to be the one who knows and decides. That's the condition. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The rain had lightened. Through the kitchen window the December light was the flat, honest gray of a sky that wasn't promising anything. You're asking me to trust other people with information I have spent years protecting because I believed. I'm asking you to stop believing that you're the only one capable of using information correctly, Harry said. That's what the greater good has always been. A reason to be the only one who decides. He paused. You were brilliant enough to build 67 charms and patient enough to maintain them for 4 years and wise enough to know that a child raised in a cupboard would comply when needed. And none of that wisdom stopped you from being wrong about almost everything that mattered. Dumbledore looked at him. I'm not saying you're useless, Harry said, and there was something that was almost, but not quite, mercy in his voice. I'm saying you're dangerous when you're unsupervised. And I'm saying that a war, a real one, against something like Voldemort, is not won by one person who knows everything. It's won by a network of people who trust each other. The silence stretched. Then Dumbledore said, You have your mother's analytical precision. His voice was careful and something under it was not. And your father's absolute certainty in the positions he took. The combination is, he stopped. Inconvenient for you? Harry said. Formidable, Dumbledore said. For everyone. Including Voldemort. He paused. Including me. Good, Harry said. That's the point. Dumbledore looked at the table, and then at his own hands, and Poppy, listening from the hallway because she had never fully gone to the next room regardless of what Harry had agreed to, watched the most powerful wizard in Britain sit at a kitchen table in a house he'd once had under surveillance, and reckon with something. It was not a clean reckoning. It was not the dramatic breaking of a man who had been certain and was now shattered. It was quieter and messier and more real than that, a man who had built a worldview over decades, who had organized his grief and his guilt and his intelligence into a single structure called the greater good, confronting a child who had dismantled that structure with the patient precision of someone who understood how it was built. The soul fragment, Dumbledore said. Extraction rather than destruction. Yes. I would need to research. It is possible that ancient magical theory, he stopped. Babbling. She's already working on related questions, Harry said. She doesn't know what she's working toward yet, but the theoretical groundwork overlaps. When the network is in place, she'll be part of it. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You've already been building it, he said. Yes, Harry said. For 3 weeks. Since the Wisengamot session. He looked at Dumbledore with those clear green eyes. I told you. I'm not going to be managed again. I'm going to know everything and choose accordingly. You can be part of that or not. But the architecture is mine. A pause. May I ask, Dumbledore said, whether you hate me? Harry considered the question with the seriousness he gave everything. No, he said. I think you believed you were doing the right thing. I think you've always believed that, and I think that's actually the most dangerous thing about you, because it means you'll do it again if no one stops you. He paused. I don't hate you. I don't trust you. Those are different things. Dumbledore absorbed this. Will you work with us? Harry said. The December light in the kitchen. The quiet house. Somewhere upstairs a door opened and closed, Sirius, unable to stay entirely away, moving. Yes, Dumbledore said. On your terms. Not just on my terms, Harry said. On everyone's. That's the point. Dumbledore nodded once. The gesture had none of its usual gravity, it was smaller and more ordinary than that, the nod of someone agreeing to something rather than bestowing something. I should go, he said. Before you do, Harry said. Ariana. Dumbledore went very still. You've been carrying that for 60 years, Harry said. And it made you certain that only you could be trusted with hard choices, because everyone else might make the same kind of mistake you made with her. I understand the logic. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. The logic is wrong. But I understand it. The kitchen was absolutely quiet. You cannot absolve me of, I'm not absolving you of anything, Harry said. I'm telling you I understand the mechanism. Because if I understand it, I can account for it. In how I work with you. He picked up his tea. She would have been what, late 70s now? 82, Dumbledore said, and his voice was entirely human in that moment, stripped of every layer of deliberate construction. She liked the garden. She was gentle. She didn't ask for any of it. No, Harry said. She didn't. Dumbledore stood. He straightened his robes with the precise automatic gesture of a man who had done it 10,000 times, and then he stopped, and looked at Harry, and the look was not the grandfatherly warmth or the calculated concern or any of the faces Poppy had ever seen him wear. It was the look of a man genuinely seeing someone. I was told, Dumbledore said, by the centaurs, many years ago, that I read the stars correctly but interpreted them according to what I wished to find. I thought I understood what that meant. He looked at Harry. I understand it better now. Good, Harry said simply. Dumbledore walked to the kitchen door and paused. The Horcrux research, he said, with his back to the room. There is a diary. It was given years ago to a man named Lucius Malfoy, who believes he holds it in trust for his master's return. It should be the first to be located. I'll tell Amelia, Harry said. There is also a ring, Dumbledore said, which belonged to the Gaunt family. It is in a ruined house in Little Hangleton. I have not retrieved it because I believed the time was not, he stopped. Because I was managing the timeline. The ring is cursed. The curse is lethal to anyone who puts it on. The ring is also a hallow, which is a different matter, and relevant to understanding Voldemort's psychology. I will write you everything I know about it. Thank you, Harry said. Dumbledore left. The kitchen door had barely closed before it opened again and Sirius came in at speed from the hallway, followed by Remus, and Poppy came from the other direction, and all three of them arrived in the kitchen simultaneously with varying degrees of suppressed urgency. Harry looked at them. "He's gone," Harry said. "He behaved himself." He paused. He confirmed the Horcrux theory. "There are at least 5. One of them is Voldemort's diary, currently with Lucius Malfoy. One is a ring in Little Hangleton that is also cursed." He looked at Sirius. "We need to tell Amelia today." Sirius was staring at him. "Harry. A Horcrux. In you." "Yes," Harry said. "I know. You're 5. You keep pointing that out and it keeps being equally true and equally irrelevant," Harry said. "I'm also the person in this room who just got the head of the DMLE equivalent target list for dark artifacts and a potential lead on Pettigrew's former associates." He looked between them. "The fragment in the scar is a problem we'll figure out. Babbling is already working adjacent to the relevant theory without knowing it. The other Horcruxes are actionable now." His eyes went to Remus. "You know the Malfoy's movements. You still have Auror contacts." "Some," Remus said carefully. "The diary has to be retrieved before Malfoy can use it. Dumbledore thinks Malfoy doesn't know what it is. Just that he was told to keep it and return it when called." Harry looked at Remus. "If it's retrieved by DMLE with a warrant and logged as evidence before anyone activates it, it's destroyed safely and Malfoy has no legal recourse because he was holding dark artifacts." Remus was quiet for a moment. He looked at Sirius. "Precise," Sirius said. "Legally airtight," Remus said. "If the evidence chain is clean." "Amelia will make it clean," Harry said. "She's good at that." Sirius crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, crouched down to Harry's level, and looked at him with the specific expression that Poppy had come to recognize as Sirius's version of emotional reckoning. "You know this doesn't make you a weapon," he said. "Having a piece of him in you. It doesn't make you his." "It doesn't make you, I know," Harry said. "Your mother put herself between you and the killing curse. That wasn't a weapon making a weapon. That was a person loving a person." His voice was rough at the edges. "You're not a Horcrux. You're Harry. The Horcrux is something that happened to you. It's not you." Harry looked at him for a moment. "I know," he said again, and this time it landed differently, softer, more received, the way you said "I know" when someone was telling you something you needed to hear and you were letting yourself hear it. Sirius put his hand on Harry's shoulder, and Harry reached up and covered it with his own hand, that gesture they'd developed over the last weeks, brief and certain. Then Harry said, "We need to send Amelia a message." "Right now?" Sirius said. "The diary could be accessed at any time," Harry said. "We don't know the timeline. Now is better than later." Sirius stood up. He looked at Remus. Remus was already at the writing desk in the corner, pulling parchment. Poppy was at the fire, calling the kettle because tea was what you did when the world was large and complicated and needed to be faced in an organized way. Harry opened the grimoire back to the pre-Norman binding theory page. "I'm going to keep working," he said, to no one in particular. "While you write." Poppy looked at him, this child at the kitchen table with his wand in his pocket and his magic worm in the room around him and a fractured piece of the darkest soul and living memory somewhere behind those green eyes, reading a 12-generation family grimoire with the focused absorption of someone who had decided that knowledge was the foundation of everything that came after. And she thought about a Tuesday morning 4 months ago when she'd knocked on the door of a very neat house in Surrey and found a boy in a cupboard. She thought about the diagnostic scan and its 67 layers. She thought about the healed rib fractures and the cup filled without spilling and the 5-year-old who had asked her, "Can you fix it?" She thought about what she'd said back. "It becomes yours." What it was always supposed to be. She looked at Harry in the kitchen of his own house on a December morning, surrounded by the people who belonged around him, with his wand and his magic and his mind all unencumbered and entirely his, and she thought, yes. That's exactly what happened. Sirius was writing at the desk, Remus looking over his shoulder, the two of them arguing quietly about the precise wording of the message to Amelia with the comfortable friction of people who had argued about things together for 20 years and found it efficient rather than difficult. Creature came in without being summoned, looked at the assembled group, made a sound that was officially disdain and practically something else, and began making enough tea for everyone. Harry didn't look up from the grimoire. "Creature," he said. "Yes, Master Harry," Creature said, with the particular emphasis he put on the title, which had evolved over the last month from pure sarcasm through grudging acknowledgement to something that was now simply how he said Harry's name. "The section of the library I haven't catalogued yet. The one on the east wall, bottom shelves, behind the genealogy texts." "What's there?" Creature considered. "Old things," he said. "Warding texts. Pre-Hogwarts magical education materials." A pause. "Some correspondence. Letters from the 11th and 12th centuries." Harry looked up for the first time. "Magical education materials. Pre-Hogwarts." "Yes, Master Harry." Harry looked at Babbling's most recent lesson notes, which were on the table beside the grimoire. He looked at the Horcrux problem, which was now written in his careful handwriting in the notebook he'd started keeping in the last 3 weeks. He looked at the wand in his inside pocket, which he could feel the way you could feel a cup of warm tea in your hand from the inside. "Can you bring them up?" he said to Creature. "All of them?" "All of them," Harry said. Creature went, with a sound that was officially grumbling and practically enthusiasm. Sirius looked over from the desk. 11th and 12th century educational materials. "If I'm going to learn everything," Harry said, back to the grimoire, "I should know what was taught before someone decided what everything was allowed to be." Remus made a sound that was either disbelief or recognition, probably both. Outside the December rain came and went. The DMLE message went out by Sirius's fastest owl at 10:30. Amelia Bones' reply arrived at 11:14, saying, "Understood. Move on Malfoy diary by end of week. Evidence team assembled. I want Potter's full Horcrux briefing notes tomorrow, AB." Harry wrote up the briefing notes with Remus cross-referencing and Sirius pacing and eating biscuits in the specific way he did when he was energized but needed somewhere to put it. The notes were 12 pages. They were clear and structured and contained 3 theories about Horcrux extraction from a living host that Harry had worked out over the last 3 weeks while ostensibly doing arithmetic. Remus read the extraction theories twice. "These are," he started. "Preliminary," Harry said. "I need Babbling to look at the pre-Norman soul-binding theory and I need Dumbledore's full research notes on the other Horcruxes to see if there's a pattern in how the soul fragments were anchored. If the anchoring method is consistent across all of them, the extraction problem becomes more tractable." He looked at Remus. "Do you know anyone at the Department of Mysteries? The Unspeakables?" Remus stared at him. "Unspeakables work on exactly these kinds of problems," Harry said patiently. "Soul theory, death mechanics, magical anchoring. If Amelia approached the right one as part of the DMLE investigation, you're 5, Sirius said, from the fireplace. "You've mentioned," Harry said. "I'm going to keep mentioning it," Sirius said. "On principle. Because someone in this house should be regularly mentioning it and it's clearly not going to be you." Harry looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. Something that was almost a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "When have I ever acted like I was 5? "Never," Sirius said. "Not once. Not for a single moment." He looked at his godson across the kitchen with an expression that was a complicated mixture of love and pride and grief for everything that should have been different and wasn't. "But you are. And that matters. Not because it limits what you can do. But because," he stopped. Then, more quietly, "because you should still get to be a kid sometimes. That's all." The kitchen was quiet. "I know," Harry said, for the 3rd time that day, and this was the fullest version yet. He set down the quill. He looked at Sirius. "After the briefing notes go to Amelia, can we do something?" Like what? Harry glanced at the window. The rain had stopped. The December sky was doing the thing it occasionally did in the afternoon, clearing to a pale cold blue with low golden light, the kind that didn't warm you but was beautiful regardless. "You were telling me about the motorbike," Harry said. "Your flying motorbike." Sirius blinked. "It's in storage. In Bristol. Dumped it there before he stopped. It might need some work." "It's a motorbike with a flying charm on it," Harry said. "What kind of work can it need?" "The kind of work that comes from 5 years of storage in a Muggle mechanic's garage where it's been charmed invisible," Sirius said. "But I suppose," he looked at Remus. "Road trip to Bristol?" Remus was already reaching for his coat. "Obviously." "Obviously," Harry agreed, and pushed back from the table. They went. The briefing notes were sealed and ready for tomorrow, the Horcrux problem was documented and moving, Amelia Bones was assembling an evidence team, Dumbledore's information was in the system, and for the rest of the afternoon Harry Potter sat in the sidecar of a motorbike in a Bristol storage yard and watched Sirius and Remus argue with great affection and profanity about what was wrong with the engine and occasionally suggested diagnostic approaches that were so accurate it silenced both of them for 30 seconds at a stretch. He bought them all chips from a Muggle shop across the road with the Muggle money Sirius kept in his pocket out of habit, and they ate chips on the bonnet of someone else's car in the winter afternoon and Sirius told him about the night he'd last ridden the bike, carrying a baby Harry across the country in the cold November dark, and Harry listened without saying anything, and the story had a weight and a tenderness in it that didn't require a response, just witnessing. Then Remus said, "I fixed it, by the way," while you were both sitting there being emotional, and Sirius said, "You absolutely did not fix it," and Remus said, "Start it and see," and Sirius started it, and it turned over first try, and the sound of it was deep and resonant and real, and Harry looked at the motorbike and said, "Can it actually fly?" Sirius looked at Remus. Remus looked at Sirius. "In terms of safety," Remus said, "it's probably inadvisable to test that over Bristol city centre at 4 in the afternoon." "But," Harry said. "But," Sirius said, revving the engine once with the expression of someone who had missed something deeply and was trying not to show how much, "there's a field about 6 miles north of here that's extremely unobserved." Harry looked at the sidecar. Looked at Sirius. Looked at the pale blue December sky above the Bristol rooftops. "Let's go," he said. They went. The field was flat and empty and the frost on the grass caught the last low light and made everything silver and clean, and Sirius opened the throttle and the motorbike lifted off the ground with the smooth inevitability of something that had always known how to do this, and the wind was cold and the sky was enormous and Harry Potter was 5 years old and flying. He had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw and a scar on his forehead that was also, somehow, a piece of the problem he was going to solve. He had 67 scars that were healing that nobody could see. He had a wand in his pocket and a grimoire at home and 12 pages of Horcrux notes that were going to make several very serious adults revise their assumptions. He had a godfather who was currently shouting something incoherent and joyful into the wind and a friend who was gripping the seat with one hand and smiling with the other, and he had a healer who had come to a house in Surrey one Tuesday and pulled the right thread until everything that needed to unravel did. He had, in short, what remained. Which was enough, he had decided. Which was, actually, everything. The motorbike banked in a wide arc over the silver field, and Harry leaned into the turn without being told to, instinctively, the way you leaned into things once you decided to stop holding back, and the cold air came at his face and the sky went on in all directions and he said nothing because there was nothing that needed saying. Below them, the frost kept its quiet pattern on the grass. Above them, the first star of the evening appeared in the east, small and clear and very bright. Harry saw it. He noted it. He filed it. Then he looked forward, into the wide blue space ahead, and that was where he kept his eyes.